Faites l'appel, s'il vous plaît, monsieur le greffier.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Hélier. Madame le connétable de Saint-Laurent. Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Brelade.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de la Trinité. Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Pierre.
Présent.
Madame le connétable de Saint-Martin.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Jean.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Clément. Monsieur le connétable de Gruville.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Ouen. Monsieur le connétable de Sainte-Marie.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Sauveur.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Southern. Madame le deputy Labby. Monsieur le deputy Tadier. Monsieur le deputy Luce. Madame le deputy Doublé. Monsieur le deputy Morel. Madame le deputy Lehegara. Monsieur le deputy Ayer. Monsieur le deputy Ward.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Owls.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Gardner. Monsieur le deputy Gorst.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Farnham.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Moore.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Mesick.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Balash. Monsieur le deputy Coles.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Porre.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy War.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Miles.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Scott.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Reneth. Madame le deputy Curtis. Madame le deputy Feltham.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Binet.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Jeune. Madame le deputy Miller.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Howe.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Binet. Monsieur le deputy Ferry.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Kovac.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Curtis. Madame le deputy Ward.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Wilson. Madame le deputy Stevenson.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Andrews.
Monsieur le doyen.
Notre aide soit au nom de Dieu qui a fait les cieux et la terre. Amen. Seigneur Dieu, Père éternel et tout-puissant, qui a établi les gouvernements et les puissances de la terre pour le règlement et pour la conduite du peuple, et qui nous a commandé d'avoir toujours pour but la gloire de ton saint nom. Nous te prions qu'il te plaise de donner à cette assemblée le don de conseil et de prudence, d'unir les cœurs et les affections de tous ceux qui la composent, de les conduire tellement toi-même par ton Saint-Esprit que toute leur délibération est accompagnée de ta bénédiction. Réussisse au bien-être et au soulagement du peuple, qu'il te plu de mettre à leurs soins. Car nous t'en prions, mon nom et par les mérites de ton Fils bien-aimé Jésus-Christ, notre Seigneur, qui nous a enseigné de t'invoquer en disant, Notre Père, qui es aux cieux, ton nom soit sanctifié, ton règne vienne, ta volonté soit faite sur la terre comme au ciel. Donne-nous aujourd'hui notre pain quotidien, et nous pardonnons nos offenses, comme nous pardonnons à ceux qui nous ont offensés. Et ne nous envoie pas en tentation, mais délivre-nous de mal, car à toi est le règne, la puissance et la gloire, au siècle des siècles. Amen.
Madame la connétable de Saint-Laurent.
Defo.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Clément.
Sir, the connétable is actually having treatment at the hospital.
Sorry, he's been taken to the hospital.
No, he's having treatment at the hospital this
Right.
morning, but he will be joining us online after he's had his treatment.
Members content to mark the connétable, excuse me. Yes.
I have been resuscitating him, that's it.
Excusez.
Monsieur le deputy Southern.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Labby.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Doublé. Monsieur le deputy Morel.
Sir, Deputy Morel has asked to be marked excuse. He's opening the swim marathon this morning, so he will be in the assembly as soon as he can be.
Members content to mark, excusez.
Madam Deputy Wilson.
Present.
Lisetta,
I just wonder if I can apologise to members that I will be absent from the Assembly later this morning to take a family member to a medical appointment.
thank you.
And me as well.
Can I just say that les États sont constitués? Thank you.
Sorry
Deputy
about that.
Kovac.
As well, just to be excused a bit later on in the morning, I have a doctor appointment and I'll be absent for a bit.
Thank you,
sometime in the-
Deputy Kovac. Any others? Well, on behalf of members, I'm pleased to welcome Lord Marland, who is visiting in his capacity as chairman of the Commonwealth Enterprise and Investment Council, and Lord Marland is in the public gallery. And we're also joined by Mr. Angus McCulloch Kesu, who is a member of our Court of Appeal, who's also just observing in the public gallery, together with Commissioner McCulloch. Thank you very much. There is one lodged proposition overnight, so I notify members that Deputy Tadier has lodged an amendment to his proposition on restriction on solar ground mounts on agricultural land, which is P53 2026. So I notify members of that lodged proposition, and in due course, Deputy Tadier, you'll need to make a proposition to reduce the notice period.
So would it be helpful to do that now, or would members like some time to maybe read it and then we...
Perhaps give members
Yeah,
some
I
time
think
to
that-
read it.
happy with
Perhaps
that,
we could
thank
deal with it this afternoon. Thank you. Very well. Unless there's anything else, we will resume public business and we will resume the debate on treating children as children and the debate on the principles, which is P14 of 2026. Deputy Miles.
Thank you, sir. I have reduced my speech somewhat given the comments from other members yesterday, in particular by Deputy Stevenson and Deputy Doublé. And I'm also a member of the Diversity Forum, and I concur with the comments paper that the panel has published. So at the outset, I want to make one point absolutely clear, and that is safeguarding is non-negotiable. It's embedded in laws passed by this Assembly, including laws protecting children's rights and preventing discrimination. Guidance should help professionals implement those laws. It shouldn't contradict them, undermine them, or attempt to overturn them. In my former role, I chaired the Ministerial Political Oversight Group for Safeguarding. I understand the issues. Safeguarding is non-negotiable. Children should be both seen and heard, always. On the radio this morning, I heard the author of the appendix presented in this proposition suggest that safeguarding was at the heart of her document. I do not agree. Every child deserves a school environment that is safe, calm, well-run, and professionally supported for both pupils and the staff responsible for them. Children and young people also have the right to be heard in decisions that affect them, alongside their parents and guardians. So this proposition moves us away from those principles rather than reinforcing them. This is not a minor adjustment or a clarification. It is a wholesale replacement of government guidance. In effect, it directs the Minister, who holds statutory duties for safeguarding and for the rights of children and young people, to discard departmental guidance and substitute it with a document written externally by a campaign organisation. That is not how safeguarding policy should be made. The existing government guidance is already a safeguarding document, and it is clear about its scope. It is non-statutory guidance for staff. It explicitly states that medical decisions sit outside schools and are not part of the guidance. Its purpose is simply to help professionals respond responsibly when a child is distressed, questioning aspects of their identity, or needing support. And the government has been really clear about that. The Minister's speech yesterday outlined that. The guidance exists to help schools maintain safe learning environments. It doesn't turn schools into clinics, and it does not attempt to medicalise childhood. By contrast, the proposition asks us to replace that professional guidance with a document written by the director of an advocacy group, Transgender Trend. The replacement guidance explicitly argues that trans-identifying children should be viewed primarily through a safeguarding lens rather than through a framework that includes diversity, human rights, and the participation of the child. It even suggests that the principle of the voice of the child being central is not appropriate in this context. Sir, that position is fundamentally at odds with the direction this Assembly has taken for many years. Jersey's safeguarding frameworks, our children's rights commitments, and our policy processes, including children's rights impact assessments, all emphasise participation, non-discrimination, and ensuring that children have meaningful opportunities to influence decisions affecting them. If guidance begins by asking professionals to set aside human rights principles and to diminish the voice of the child, then that is not strengthening safeguarding. It is rolling back the standards that protect children. The proposition also claims that the replacement document is evidence-based, but that claim does not withstand scrutiny, in my view. The author of the document is described as a distinguished expert, yet the organisation itself describes itself as a campaigning group. The document itself is not peer-reviewed professional guidance. It's not produced by safeguarding experts, educational bodies, or clinical researchers. It is a position statement from an advocacy organisation. By contrast, the government guidance recognises the complexity and uncertainty in this area. It acknowledges the need for caution and refers to the importance of avoiding polarisation, something that was also emphasised in the Cass review. That is what responsible professional guidance looks like: cautious, scoped, and capable of revision as evidence evolves. Another theme that I wasn't going to mention, but I am, that runs heavily through the proposition is the issue of toilets. The report claims that the current guidance states that children in transition must be allowed to choose whichever toilets they wish to use, but when one reads the guidance itself, that is not what it says. The guidance requires schools to assess facilities on a case-by-case basis. It encourages a mixed model of provision, including single-sex facilities, single occupancy, gender-neutral spaces, and accessible options. It emphasises behaviour standards and sanctions for inappropriate conduct. In other words, it focuses on practical safeguarding, professional judgment, clear expectations, and protecting all pupils from bullying or harassment. This proposition instead invites us to believe that the defining safeguarding crisis in our schools is the signage on a cubicle door. And that is not a proportionate way to approach safeguarding. So I also want to acknowledge something about the wider social context in which this debate is taking place. Across many areas of society, we see generational differences in how people approach questions of identity, inclusion, and personal expression. Younger generations have grown up in a world that is generally more open about difference and more comfortable discussing issues that previous generations often avoided. That doesn't mean that every young person thinks in the same way, and it certainly doesn't mean adults should abandon caution or safeguarding responsibilities. But it does remind us that the lived reality of young people today may be so very different from the assumptions that many of us grew up with. Schools have always had to navigate those generational shifts, whether the issue was race, disability, sexuality, or any other form of difference. The role of education is not to panic in the face of social change, but to respond with calm professionalism and a commitment to treating every child with dignity. And we should be careful, sir, not to legislate our discomfort with social change, rather than addressing the real safeguarding needs of children. And the Minister's guidance attempts to do exactly that. Finally, so I wanted to mention the UK legal arguments. The proposition relies heavily on UK legal arguments, including a recent UK Supreme Court decision. But Jersey is not governed by the UK Equality Act, and UK legal judgments do not and should not automatically dictate Jersey policy. Our framework includes the Discrimination Jersey Law, which recognises gender reassignment as a protected characteristic and is plainly relevant to educational settings. Jersey laws, sir, are made here by this Assembly. They are not simply imported from Westminster. Indeed, Deputy Balash himself has previously been very clear in explaining Jersey's constitutional autonomy. Our legislation proceeds through royal assent, but it originates in Jersey and reflects Jersey's legal system. Our courts have also demonstrated that English legal approaches are not automatically adopted into Jersey law. So we should be extremely cautious about being asked to replace Jersey government guidance on the basis of an emotive reading of UK legal developments. Sir, safeguarding is not strengthened by ideology, whether that ideology comes from one side of this debate or the other. Safeguarding is strengthened by careful policy, professional judgment, and respect for the legal frameworks of this Assembly has already put in place. The Minister's guidance may not satisfy everyone. No guidance ever will in such a sensitive and complex area, but it attempts to navigate that complexity responsibly. It supports schools, reflects Jersey law, and keeps the focus where it belongs on the welfare and the safety of children. This proposition does something very different. It asks us to replace professional guidance with an externally authored campaigning document to sideline established safeguarding principles and to do so in the name of protecting children. Sir, I do not believe that is the right course for this Assembly, and for those reasons I shall be rejecting the proposition and supporting the Minister in the current guidance. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy Miles. The next member to speak is Deputy Catherine Curtis, followed by Deputy Wall.
Thank you, sir. So I don't want to repeat things already said, but what I can speak about is the experience of the Children Education and Home Affairs Scrutiny Panel regarding this subject. As chair of the panel, I often get emails from islanders, and they are usually about problems at school, needs for community policing, concerns around special educational needs. I can confirm that I have not received any emails from parents worried about bad effects of the transgender guidance on their own school children, and that is over the entire term of the last 4 years. Like other members, I've received many emails on this matter from campaigners. They generally started in 2024, even though the original transgender guidance was written in 2021. These emails were from a pressure group. And of course, over time, they've picked up people along the way with genuinely felt, but I think unfounded concerns. The guidance was then reviewed, and I have to say the new guidance seemed fair and reasonable, and is, of course, subject to future revision anyway. It focuses on treating all children with dignity and respect. Deputy Balash mentions areas where the guidance appears to contradict itself, but that is because the guidance is supposed to allow teachers and other professional staff to have the leeway to decide what's best in particular circumstances, and that's how it should be. The panel was asked by campaigners to undertake a standalone review of the guidance, but considering that it seemed adequate and that we were focused on addressing online harms, we said no. What we did do was to question the Minister in public hearings, taking note of any concerns raised is as our duty as scrutineers. I also asked those who emailed me with concerns about the guidance to get back to me if they had any specific concerns about a particular school or incident, but they never did. On the other hand, we have received emails from parents of children currently in school in support of the transgender guidance. And I'm more inclined to take note of those who are actually experiencing something, whether they are parents or young people who've just gone through the school system. It seems that there is no groundswell of worry among parents with children currently at school. So that explains the experience of the panel, but I speak now as a deputy and not as the chair of the panel. So my own school was the Convent FCJ, and at that school we were allowed to be creative and to be ourselves. My school reports always used to say, Catherine does things in her own special way. But I'm grateful for that freedom, and children must be allowed freedom to develop and be themselves. Some may experiment with different ideas of identity, and some will find that they really are trans, without a doubt. Supporting a child in their beliefs is not the same as promoting an ideology. I think that those raising concerns around the current guidance are misguided. I would like to think that their concerns are well meant and that the proposer of the proposition and the amendment and the local campaigners mean well. But however, they have got it wrong. The guidance as it is okay. There is no need for this proposition. I've recently met a number of trans people and was impressed by their creativity and, dare I say, how beautiful they were. I do hope they don't feel crushed by the wider anti-trans movement, which it seems would like to obliterate them. I hope they can take courage from the many supportive speeches from members in this assembly. But coming back to the core subject of the proposition, to remove considerate guidance and replace it with something that I find lacking in care and understanding, so I urge members to vote against it.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Wall.
Thank you, sir. And I rise really because I'm in the sort of the why category of all of this, and that is why is this such a prevalent issue in current thinking? So I want to start by stating categorically that I do not doubt the Minister's commitment to safeguarding or to the welfare of young people. I must, though, challenge the framing he has presented because it focuses almost entirely on procedures and documents while avoiding the far more fundamental issue at the heart of this debate. We are being asked to choose between two approaches to how schools should respond once a child says they are trans. But that is not the real question. The real question, the one we seem determined not to confront, is why more young people are presenting with gender distress in the first place. And until we face that honestly, no guidance, however well-intentioned, will truly safeguard children. The Minister, in his public comments, speaks as though all cases of gender distress are the same. They are not. Some young people have long-standing, deep-rooted feelings of gender incongruence. They deserve compassion, respect, and appropriate support. But others are vulnerable adolescents dealing with anxiety, trauma, social isolation, neurodiversity, or the powerful influence of online algorithms that shape identity, belonging, and self-diagnosis. These are not fringe concerns. They are well-recognized patterns in adolescent development across many areas of safeguarding. We acknowledge the impact of immersion in eating disorders, self-harm, extremism, and body image. Yet in this one area, we treat it as taboo, even to raise the possibility. That silence does not protect children, it leaves them unsupported and misunderstood. Schools cannot diagnose the cause of a child's distress. They are not mental health clinicians. They cannot distinguish between deep-seated dysphoria and distress that arises from other vulnerabilities. Expecting them to do so, or expecting them to respond in a single, uniform way, is not safeguarding, it is oversimplification. The Minister argues that Proposition P14/2026 undermines children's rights. I would argue that ignoring the underlying causes of distress undermines their well-being. Children have the right to be heard, yes, but they also have the right to be protected from harm, including harm that may come from unexamined assumptions or from the unintended consequences of adult decisions. Proposition P16/2026 is not perfect. No policy in this area ever will be. But it is a form of damage limitation in a system that currently lacks the diagnostic capacity, the mental health support, and the specialist pathways that young people deserve. It prevents schools from unintentionally reinforcing something that may be a symptom of deeper issues. It creates space for proper assessment, proper safeguarding, and proper professional involvement. Some parents and advocates find this deeply uncomfortable. I understand that. Suggesting that online environments or adolescent vulnerability may have shaped a child's distress can feel like a personal accusation. But our responsibility in this assembly is not to protect adult feelings, it is to protect children, all children, including those whose distress may not stem from the place we assume. The Minister tells us that safeguarding must be led by professionals, not politics. I totally agree. But safeguarding must also be led by honesty. And honesty requires us to acknowledge that we do not yet fully understand the rise in adolescent gender distress, that the causes are varied, and that a single procedural response cannot possibly meet every child's needs. If we truly care about children, we must be willing to have the harder conversation, not just about what schools should do, but what is driving this trend, how online ecosystems shape identity, and how we can build the mental health capacity to support every young person appropriately. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Wall. Deputy Wilson.
Thank you, sir. I'd just like to follow on in relation to some of the comments that Deputy Miles said, which had some resonance with me. Some of the concerns raised by Deputy Balash, particularly in relation to safeguarding and clarity for schools, are concerns that some members will share. There's no doubt about that. But as an open society, I imagine most of us would agree that we need to be open to all views and perspectives. And in this regard, this proposition is actually no different. It's just a view. However, the proposition effectively asks us to adopt, in one step, an alternative model of guidance for schools, without the level of consultation and engagement that such a change would normally require. Rather than moving wholesale to a different framework, the Minister has already stated that he is focused on improving the existing guidance. And that review should ensure it is clearer, more balanced, and better supports teachers in exercising their professional judgment. Of course, we need to equip professionals to respond carefully and appropriately to each individual child. And that is why any guidance we produced should be decided with the involvement of schools and teachers, where local consultation, a review of the evidence, and professional judgment each play their part. Given that safeguarding is the foundation on which Deputy Balash has built his argument, I would suggest that in this context, safeguarding is not about the adoption, wholesale, of someone else's guidance, but it's about listening, it's about observing, and it's about responding to the child in front of us. Guidance is a framework for support, not a fait accompli. That said, Deputy Balash makes some relevant points in his proposition, and further in his speech yesterday, in relation to the findings of the CAS review, the recent Supreme Court ruling on single-sex spaces, and the lack of clarity and paradoxical nature of certain components of the existing guidelines, and he's right to highlight these. But what is not right is that we are presented with a fait accompli that the guidance he offers as an alternative is the guidance that teachers should be made to follow. Decisions on guidance are not decisions that need to be made in a rush. After all, the existing guidance has been in place for many years, and there is no evidence of harm as it's been asserted. The salient points the Deputy makes are that aspects of the guidance are unclear or contradictory, and no doubt as knowledge develops, approaches will need to change, but these are not matters that need to be considered as matters of urgency or because someone has produced a set of guidance that we must now adopt. It is in no one's interest to have guidance that is imposed. It is better to listen to concerns, consider developments in the evidence, look at those areas where there is ambiguity, and bring an improved version. There isn't a case for adopting wholesale guidance from a pressure group, as been stated previously. There's no evidence that what we have now has served us badly. And we should be open to evidence being presented that could make it better to implement. But we need to think about that and not rush it. Trusting people to do it a bit better is the thing. The inconsistencies have been pointed out, the issue of evidence has been pointed out, and it wouldn't be unreasonable to ask everyone to come up with something that fits everybody better. So guidance is not set in stone, it can be changed and developed, and let's allow that to happen. The Minister's already given his commitment to review it. Guidance that's done elsewhere shouldn't be adopted in a rush. What we don't want is for this to become the domain of activists. There should be enough of us who have the interest of children at heart to look at this dispassionately and produce a document that is helpful to all parties. It is for this reason, sir, that I won't be supporting Deputy Ballas's proposition.
Thank you, Deputy Wilson. The next member to speak is Deputy Renouf, followed by the Chief Minister, followed by Deputy Coles, followed by the Constable of Grouville. Deputy Renouf.
Thank you, sir. I too can shorten my comments because of some excellent speeches that we've already heard. But I did want to pick up, first of all, on some comments by Deputy Ward, who framed his speech in terms of the rise in gender questioning and wanting to understand that. And I just wanted to raise the point of whether it really is a rise in gender questioning and gender dysphoria. I would suggest that the better understanding and support we have for students today might suggest that we are simply surfacing what has always been there. Deputy Waugh also talked about distress, and I think there's an important distinction to draw here. I mentioned yesterday the significance of Deputy Balash's use of the phrase suffering from gender dysphoria, and that locates the source of distress within the person. It is their pathology that is the problem. I would say that a very significant source of the distress that students feel in this issue is actually the lack of support and understanding. So we reduce stress by sensitive, calm, and flexible support for students who are going through these difficult questions and trying to work them through. I guess the main point I want to make is one of the things we're all aware of over the last few years is the way that political debate has become polarised and heavily dominated by issues that are often framed as culture wars. And I think we are slightly on the edge of those ideological storms, which are generally framed in the context of UK party politics and UK legislation. I think it's a strength that we have managed to avoid being too battered by those storms. And I think it represents a reasonably strong desire in Jersey to avoid the extremes of what is going on elsewhere. I don't think we should be trying to import culture wars into Jersey where there are none. And I think we are lucky that we have not seen the same weaponisation of gender identity here as we have in the UK up until the tabling of this proposition, which does unfortunately open that door. So I'm powerfully reminded of Section 28, which some members may recall was introduced in the UK in 1988. It was a response by the then Conservative government to what was perceived as growing promotion of homosexuality, particularly in schools. And I think there were some similarities to the present moral panic around trans rights. Just as with this proposed trans guidance, Section 28 was presented as neutral. It was simply to ensure that teachers were not promoting homosexuality. But it was not neutral, as any gay person in the UK who lived through those times will tell you. Any representation that was remotely positive about gay people, gay lifestyles, gay sexuality was repressed. The effect, and actually I think also the intent, of the no promotion was to reinforce the notion that being gay was deviant. Section 28 was intended to be a statement about what constitutes normality. I note that Section 28 never applied in Jersey, and I'm thankful for that. one reason for that might be that in 1988, homosexuality was still illegal in Jersey. We were well behind the times. But I would say that since homosexuality was legalized in 1990, I think, we've moved quite quickly. Jersey has done a good job in terms of its social, what you might call social liberalism. And I think that's something of which we can be proud, and I think this assembly has continued that. Section 28 was linked to a traditional view of family, that it was a man and a woman married for life, and that was what should be promoted. Sir, that world disappeared a long, long time ago. We live in a society where there are happily family units with children made up of single parents, gay men, gay women, and transsexual couples. That reflects the incredible variety of human sexuality and human sexual identity, and the full spectrum of choices that people make when they are free to do so. From my point, I'd say it's not for us, particularly several generations away from childhood, in many of our cases, certainly in mine, to try and impose our views on what is normal on the next generation. Diversity is good. Human sexuality and identity exists on spectrums. And we know that just as a certain percentage of people are left-handed, so a certain percentage are gay, and a certain percentage have gender dysphoria. And as Deputy Mezek said yesterday, it has been so throughout human history, in every culture and every society. It's a low percentage, much lower than the prevalence of homosexuality, for example, but it exists and always has. Gender identity has always had a fluid element, and transgender is a logical expression of that. I want to make a point that I'm grateful to Deputy Stevenson for mentioning last night, which is, I think, something quite unusual has happened in this debate, or surprising, which is that a debate which looked like it might divide us has actually ended up bringing us together. I think that's worth building on, because I think what we're seeing actually is a show of solidarity and a rejection of those voices that seek to divide us. I think that division doesn't belong here, and I think it's been a real strength. And I do want to pay tribute in that to the trans community for sticking with this process and showing such clarity and restraint in their responses. So I'm going to skip over some points I was going to make about the legal situation. I think the one point I want to draw out is the underlying ethos of the treating children as children's approach is pretty explicitly hostile to the idea of children's rights. And I think that, as Deputy Miles explained in very clear terms, is a real shame. At its heart, the proposed guidance says that children's rights should be subordinate to adults' decision-making. Having listened to children, adults will then take responsibility. Deputy Balash says that ought not to be controversial, but it is, because it unpicks a decade of work since the Care Inquiry to embed children's rights in our society and in our education system. As I said earlier, trans people have always been with us in one form or another. I think of the travel writer Jan Morris, who transitioned in the 1960s. I think of the cyclist Robert Miller, in the area which I'm familiar with, who transitioned relatively recently. And of course, in the Jersey context, I think of Claude Cahoon. As I said earlier, a small minority, but small minorities, the rights of small minorities are, if anything, harder to protect. It is relatively easy, not easy, it is not as hard, shall we say, to defend the rights of larger minorities. There are fewer defenders for a conspicuously small minority. And I think this proposition would embed an ideology that is at its heart hostile to a small minority, and it would embed it in the heart of the education system. When I was a minister, there was a work experience student who came to shadow government for a week, I think it was. And at the end, she asked for to do an interview with me, just to ask some questions. And so I did. At the end, though, I turned the tables and I asked a question. It was at the time when you members may recall there was a big thing about what is a woman, and there was a sort of a big debate going on about that. So I asked her about her generation and how they were dealing with these gender identity issues, and she was incredibly relaxed about it. The gist of her answer was that her generation were very accepting and supportive of whatever their colleagues were going through, and she didn't really understand what the grown-ups were fussing about. I'll finish, sir, with some thoughts on the power and positivity of transitional parts of human identity. In a world of AI, it is creativity that will mark out humans. This is where increasing human value will be found. Increasingly, human value will be found. Just as the silicon chip got rid of many manual jobs, from the typing pool to the assembly line, so AI is going to replace many routinized office jobs. AI can be creative too, but it can only be creative on the back of what has already been created. True creativity will still come from humans. And where does that creativity come from? Well, lots of places, but I would suggest, based on my experience in the creative industry, is that it often comes from boundary areas, from people and places at the edge, from collisions between different experiences, from people who may be different, sometimes awkwardly so. It does not come from putting people in boxes, from trying to build society around traditional archetypes. We should reject this amendment because it gives too much ground to those who do not think that being trans is a valid experience. So I'd end with adapting a famous piece of marketing. Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the gender fluid and the gender questioning. While some see them as the crazy ones, we see genius, because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. Here's to you.
Thank you, Deputy Renouf. Chief Minister.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to clear one sort of growing myth up, and that is that schools, and I state this categorically, schools are not promoting transgender issues. People are not taught, coerced, encouraged in any way to question their gender in the school environment. Professional guidance is there to assist schools. And this debate is about how schools respond if a child raises questions about their gender identity. So I do not accept that the approach set out in the proposition represents the right way to respond to the complex realities facing families and schools today. Concerns about safeguarding and parental involvement must be addressed, but they must be addressed with care and evidence and not through intervention that risks unintended harm. Our schools deal every single day with pupils facing a wide range of difficult personal circumstances. Safeguarding has always and should always be guided by professionals. And it should always act with discretion and the ability to respond to individual situations rather than a single approach determined by this Assembly. At its heart, this proposition risks replacing careful professional judgment with rigid rules. So much of the debate has centred on parental involvement because family support is hugely important. For most children, loving and supportive parents are the greatest source of strength and reassurance they will ever have. We should recognise that. We should celebrate that. But we must also recognise that confidentiality is not always about fear or conflict. Sometimes it is about timing. Sometimes it is about uncertainty. Sometimes it is about the very real risk from a young person's perspective of losing the love and security they depend upon the most. We've had a lot of correspondence about this, but I recall particularly how one parent described how when their child was going through an intensely difficult period, they were there as a constant source of comfort and stability. Yet when that child, as a young adult, finally felt able to share their true self, they did so knowing they were taking a profound emotional risk. They feared that in revealing something deeply personal, they might lose, at the very moment they need it most, the support that had always sustained them. That experience will not be unique. It reminds us that these situations are often fragile and deeply human. And that is why professionals sometimes need the space to manage conversations carefully, helping young people move towards openness, whilst maintaining family support in a way that is safe and constructive. I also want to say something briefly about the tone of this debate beyond this chamber. A number of members have mentioned it. Deputy Doublé mentioned it. Unfortunately, much of the commentary we have seen on local social media in recent weeks has been unpleasant and frankly distressing, and in most instances completely unacceptable. Personal attacks and dismissive language directed at our trans community only serves to harm and does not help us reach better policy. It risks deepening division and causing real hurt. We must be better than that. We are a small community. We know one another. The way we speak to each other really, really matters. Members must therefore consider whether this proposition would genuinely improve safeguarding or whether it would risk narrowing the ability of schools and professionals to act in the best interests of individual children. In my view, our responsibility is to maintain a balanced approach, one that recognises the importance of parental involvement, one that supports children through uncertainty rather than facing premature decisions, one that builds trust rather than creating fear. And above all, we must remember what kind of society we want Jersey to be. We all know that we are strongest when we are inclusive, when we show compassion, and when we ensure that no one, regardless of race or disability or gender, feels pushed into the margins of society. Every person, every single person growing up in this island should know that they are valued, are supported, and live in a place where no one is left behind. That is the Jersey I believe in, sir, and that is why I cannot support this proposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Minister. Deputy Coles.
Thank you, sir. Sir, there's a couple of points in the proposer of this proposition's opening speech which they left me a bit uncomfortable. And it's also maybe points to why this document that the proposer is suggesting isn't actually fit for Jersey. It hasn't been written in a Jersey or even a UK context. One part of the proposer's opening speech references that you can take a tablet for testosterone. Now, as somebody who's been diagnosed with hypogonadism, means that I cannot produce my own testosterone naturally, I can attest that in Jersey there is absolutely no tablet you can take to get testosterone. You actually have to have injections. It is heavily controlled by doctors, heavily monitored by doctors, and it's not as simple as popping a tablet. That is something that exists in the US, and we are fully aware that the US's medical system is sometimes more based on its price tag than it is on its actual care for individuals. So I was also very disturbed by the proposer of this proposition when he referred to a 16-year-old girl as an attractive 16-year-old girl. The use of that adjective made me feel really uncomfortable because we put value in that person simply by the way that they looked rather than just being an individual. And I feel this really drags it back to the point where we are valuing young women especially purely for their looks, and that made me feel very, very uncomfortable, and I wanted that on the record, sir. So when we talk about gender and things, we don't all get the words right, and I apologise if I ever do get the words wrong. I always try my best, and because the world is changing, we have to change with it. We have to adapt. But when we actually talk about life and the creation of life, we have to look at the reproductive system and how it works, and it's actually incredible. When we talk about biology and how we are created, we know that we start at a point where we are 21 chromosomes, 42 chromosomes that come together, 21 from semen and 21 from an egg. Whether it's male, female, it really doesn't matter. Scientists have done experiments where they've created life using 21 chromosomes just from a woman, just from an egg, sorry. So for me, that makes me feel a bit uncomfortable. It's getting close to eugenics, but that in itself can be a problem in itself. But we know with chromosomes and how they develop that they are not perfect. We are aware of a number of syndromes and conditions that are caused when our chromosomes do not fit this binary box that we seem to think that exists, because DNA is really incredible and it's really complicated, and so it doesn't create things that fit a set pattern. This is why I am taller than every single member of my family, and my mother is only 5 foot. So we also talk about, so that many members in this assembly will be familiar with the term of an hermaphrodite. This is an old term, sir, which isn't really used anymore. We no more refer to it as intersex, and this is caused by variations. I also, sorry, when we're on chromosomes, there's always an interesting fact that I always find is nice to drop in occasionally. Henry VIII divorced all his wives because they couldn't give him a male heir. When we actually talk about where the genetic component comes for male, it's us. It's men that create that, put that line down. It's not women. So actually, when Henry VIII was blaming all his wives, sorry, Henry, it was your fault. But when we talk about how intersex variations are caused and births, when we look at global statistics, and global statistics are always a difficult one, so there's quite a large range. It's estimated that it's somewhere between 1,500 to 2,000 births a year. So given that there's about 140 million babies born every year, that means there's at least 90,000 babies born every year where there might be an intersex variation that exists. Sometimes this presents externally, and sometimes a doctor has to make a choice. At one point, doctors used to have to make a choice. In fact, Mexico was the first country in the world that banned doctors from making that point at birth. And this was interesting for me in my understanding of the trans world and the trans community, because there was a point where people were saying that, you know, we talk about a gender assigned at birth, and I thought, well, that's a strange statement, because I wasn't assigned it. I was born, I clearly presented as male, and then you learn about intersex, and you're like, oh, okay, so actually maybe there are some differences in this, and maybe the assigned at birth is actually a relevant, or maybe a term of identified at birth, because there's certain things that present clearly and more obviously than others, but we're still talking about 90,000 babies born every year that could be somehow not fitting that binary box. And this also comes, we're debating this proposition as amended, sir, which is where the proposer has allowed the minister to make minor alterations to the guidance presented. Now, the question is, so what in this context is minor? If the minister decided, actually, do you know what, he's going to get rid of all gendered pronouns and use gender-neutral pronouns, is that acceptable? Because that's a minor alteration, but it takes the essence of what saying that everything is binary out the window, sir. I struggle, as Deputy Reniff has said earlier, you know, transgender has been recorded through many, through the centuries, through many different cultures, not connected to Europe as well. There was I might say this wrong, an Hajara community in India that has existed for centuries, which has gender diverse roles. Many indigenous North American cultures recognize two-spirit identities going back through history. So this is not a new occurrence. So this maybe goes to what Deputy Walker said. Why are we having this now? And I think this is because we have become a more open and more accepting community. The fact that gay people are feeling more confident about their sexuality is wonderful. I mean, I've said to people before that I really do hope for a day where pride no longer has to exist, because that means that any child who grows up and needs to come out does so without fear. But the problem is, while even one child has to have fear about coming out to their parents, that they might not fit a binary box that society has decided that we should all fit into, then it has to continue, because people still have to be aware that it doesn't matter how someone chooses to dress, how someone chooses to look, or the fact that they don't choose any of this, and it's all put down to them as part of their DNA, part of their chromosomes, then actually they should just be accepted for who they are. So I worry quite a lot that we seem to be so fascinated by what other people are doing in the privacy of their own lives that actually it doesn't matter. It seems to spill over into nastiness that gets distributed around. So I think people should just be able to be treated as they are, as they want. We talk about the meeting with the trans community that Deputy Doublé helped arrange with Liberate, and that was a wonderful meeting. Speaking to people with lived experience and hearing their views and their sides and why they are worried about this, because some of these people weren't able to express themselves. They had to go through life with an internal turmoil. When we talk about mental health, allowing people just to be able to express themselves can reduce that inner turmoil to a point that they don't have other issues that come along with this. They're allowed to be themselves. And I think that is a really, really important part of life, to allow people to just simply be themselves, sir. So, sir, I'm not an expert on guidance. I've been told, the Minister and a number of people through the scrutiny panel, that the current guidance is fit for purpose. It matches what the community who is worried need. And it also, and I actually one of my key parts of the guidance that I like is the fact that it's on a case-by-case basis of whether parents are told, because not every parent is perfect. Not every parent is going to be able to accept somebody openly and without prejudice. And actually, that child has that right to be protected from their own parents, sir, because not every parent is perfect. So, sir, I will not be supporting Deputy Balash in this.
Thank you, Deputy Coles. The next speaker is the Connotar of Greville.
Thank you, sir. And the Minister will remember that of the scrutiny panel that I'm very grateful to be a member of, I was the most questioning, and the 85% statistic had worried me. I'm not going to try and deceive anybody, and my panel members know that. But having looked at that statistic, sir, just to remind members, 85% was a statistic given to us of those who'd been through the watchful waiting principle and come out the other side not requiring any further intervention, sir. And I thought about that. Does the Minister's guidance cater for the 85%? And yes, sir, they do. This guidance does have, as one of its tools, watchful waiting. So the teachers are able to use that principle. And I thought to myself, does it also cater for the 15% that remain? That very small community, sir, literally only a handful, who we should all value and celebrate, in my opinion. Are they catered for in this guidance? And yes, they are, because there is quite a heavy weighting to help them through this process. And let's be fair, they had gone through the whole of their secondary school education with these concerns, these anxieties. And is that guidance going to cater for their needs? And yes, it does, sir. And we have examined this guidance in great detail and questioned the Minister on it. And, sir, I'm comfortable that this guidance is fit for purpose and should be supported. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Connotar. Connotar of St Brelard.
Thank you, sir. My interest in this matter has been piqued by various instances, sir. The first was in connection with a proposed refurbishment of some parish children's play park toilet facilities. It was outlined in the architect's plans that on the basis of current UK practice that the toilets should be multi-sex. So that advice was followed and plans drawn up accordingly. This, sir, was picked up by several parents when the plans were presented, and the strong message was that they didn't want their children going into such a unisex facility. We subsequently changed the plans to provide separate female and male toilets, as I accepted the views put forward. Another instance, which sharpened my mind to the topic was after I was asked by members of the Women's Rights Network to use St Bride's Parish Hall for a talk by Stephanie Davies RI. I've met the ladies involved, sir, and can assure members that they don't have horns. They are educated people and balanced in my view, and their views have credence with the benefit of their own life experiences. The booking was taken and the talk advertised. However, soon after this, I received a barrage of correspondence from members of the transgender community demanding that the booking should be cancelled on the basis that it was going to be a hate speech against transgender individuals. These individuals also barraged the office staff, saying that this should be cancelled. Now, sir, I'm not one to be bullied by anyone, so the talk went ahead and I attended more out of curiosity than anything else. Well, I can say, sir, that I found the presentation informative and certainly educational from my point of view, and it seemed to be well received by the 60 or 70 people present. I did learn, sir, that Mrs. Davies RI was also due to present to educationalists at Highland College, but despite having been brought over from the UK at no expense to government, this pre-arranged talk was cancelled at the last minute by the Minister or his staff, doubtless succumbing to pressure from those who don't agree with the principles that were to be discussed. I felt, sir, this was particularly rude and ashamed that staff were prevented from hearing the talk. Conversations with private conversations with teachers have told me that there are rare cases of what one might call gender confusion or dysphoria, but as a profession, they're quite good at dealing with it. The cases are rare, and they are well trained in their role to deal with the children who might find themselves with these problems, if you can call them that. One might actually question, so whether the guidance should just be about safeguarding and go no further than that. I, sir, have no issue with whatever paths adults choose, but I don't feel we should force any of what I would call unnatural ways on our children. That's my view, and I maintain that. And my primary reason, sir, for supporting the Deputy's proposition is that I have young grandchildren, and I wouldn't want them unduly influenced or led into the wrong direction by our education system. I would want them to be treated as children. I am saddened, sir, that the Minister has chosen not to engage in the discussion with the Women's Rights Network and has taken what I might call the ostrich approach and buried his head in the sand in the hope the issue will pass. Well, it won't, sir. It'll come back. And whilst it may be for a future minister to deal with, I would urge that the staff in the department keep the present guidelines high on their review list and keep communication channels open. Surely, sir, communication is key when there are differences so that an equitable outcome can prevail. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Conatap. The next speaker is Deputy Poiré.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I will start my speech with a moment of reflection, and my reflection goes back to our last election where Jersey made history for various different reasons. One of the reasons was the fact that a Black person, me, was elected for the very first time. It was a meaningful moment that gave hope to people from Black and minority backgrounds who saw my presence as a sign of progress and hope that their voices would be carried through in this chamber. Today, sir, is a different day. It's a moment that is in complete contrast to the mood I felt and some people did 4 years ago. We are debating issues that deeply affect minority groups, trans children, who represent one of the smallest and most vulnerable groups in our society. As a person from a minority group background, I have lived with the intersection of misunderstanding, prejudice, and invisibility throughout my whole life. What the changes have done to me, what the challenges have done to me have made me stronger and more resilient. The thing is, sir, it's when society questions the legitimacy or humanity of any small minority groups, it resonates painfully for someone who has ever been in the minority person in the room. As many have mentioned in their speech, trans youth face disproportionately high levels of bullying, social isolation, and mental health challenges. When a responsible society discusses groups who are already vulnerable, compassion and care becomes especially important. I feel that the proposition ignites a debate made by some that their rights are more important than others, and I cannot support this ideology. As an elected member on the GCRT committee, I strive to support minority groups. My main focus is always to consider the well-being of vulnerable people, to elevate unheard voices, and to protect individuals who may be unable to speak for themselves. My support on this debate is for the LGBTQ+ community and trans people, and my support is based on my belief of fairness, value of human life, and dignity to everyone. The proposition calls for implementation of a belief that contradicts what I stand for in this assembly. And for that reason, sir, I will be rejecting the proposition with its amendment. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy Poiré. Deputy Dublé.
Thank you, sir. I'm trying to organise my thoughts because I have lots to say, and I wanted to respond to some of the previous speakers and indeed the clarification that was asked of me yesterday. And so I did look back at my speech yesterday, and I can confirm that I did not label any particular group as a hate group, and I should not be characterised as doing so, sir. What I did say was linked to a United Nations article which I read, notifying some groups as hate groups. And in fact, I will read out what that article says. It mentions the word hate, which is why I used it, and I will read that out. And the point I was making was about not giving those groups equal voice. And I think something that previous speakers have touched upon quite effectively is this idea of outside groups coming into Jersey and that feeling of being invaded, and I do think we should resist that. And so I also think that we should resist singling people out, especially those who have no right of reply in this assembly. I don't think that's a constructive or a dignified way to act as a states member, and that in fact encourages hate-based behaviours. So I would ask members to resist doing so. Sir, in terms of those who have opposing views, I respect the right of every citizen to express their views, and I will always try to listen to people, and I have done throughout my time as a states member, and I will continue to treat people in a civil way and with respect, and sometimes I will disagree with people, and when I do that I will do so respectfully. But I stand by my point, sir, that I do not think that groups from outside of Jersey who have political goals that don't align with Jersey's values, I think that we should resist that. And sir, I will read some paragraphs from the UN Women website. And they describe attempts in many countries to roll back hard-won progress and further entrench stigma, endangering the rights and lives of LGBTQ+ people. These movements use hateful propaganda and disinformation to target and attempt to delegitimize people with diverse sexual orientations, gender identities, gender expressions, and sex characteristics. There is a long tradition in which anti-rights movements frame equality for women and LGBTQ+ people as a threat to so-called traditional family values. Movements encompassing anti-gender, gender-critical views have taken this to new extremes, tapping into wider fears about the future of society and accusing feminists and LGBTQI movements of threatening civilization itself. Anti-rights groups have mobilized political support by creating and fostering a moral panic that falsely associates LGBTQ+ people with mental illness and perversion. Those are quite strong words, aren't they, from the UN? And some of the speeches that we've heard, which I think take materials from anti-trans rights campaign groups, I actually put more faith in the UN and in research and evidence by scientists, which I will come to a bit later in my speech. So it's not just for states members to guard against these political groups that are trying to invade Jersey's States Assembly. I would really urge our citizens to be aware that this is happening and that national media is not a place to learn the truth about trans people. Something that I've been really heartened by, actually, by many of the speeches, is that I think there are many states members who perhaps didn't know about some of these issues and have really made such an effort to listen to the community and to educate themselves. And I'm so grateful for that and for that allyship. Deputy Stevenson's speech yesterday was fantastic, Deputy Miles as well, and Deputy Renouf, who is my vice chair on my scrutiny panel. I'm so grateful to him for that speech, and I know that the trans community will be as well. I actually found it really uplifting and inspiring the way that he spoke about prominent trans figures. I found that was a really respectful and uplifting way to speak, and that's how I would like to approach my words as well, sir. I found Deputy Coles' speech really interesting as well, and he talked about gender diversity. And something that he raised made me think about, so the psychology of why there might be questions around trans people and how we interact with trans people in our community. And in terms of psychology, one basic function of every human brain is that we form stereotypes. And sometimes we think those are negative, but actually stereotypes are really functional. They allow us to navigate the world without having to stop and calculate different categories and characteristics of every single object, animal or human being that we come across. So, for example, a stereotype can help us to look at someone and identify perhaps the way they have their hair, perhaps what kind of clothes they're wearing, and to assign one of our inbuilt stereotypes to them. And then we might think, okay, that person looks like a man or that person looks like a woman, and it helps us to relate to them in a quicker way so that we don't have to stop and collect information about every person or circumstance that we come across. But sometimes people don't fit into those categories, as Deputy Renouf so expertly explained to us. And again, that's where we need to educate ourselves. And I can understand why certain members of our community might have trouble with that, because it is a basic function of our brain. But I do have faith in Jersey people that actually they can educate themselves and listen. And I really hope that this debate, where states members have listened and educated themselves and given some really intelligent and thoughtful speeches, I hope that those get through to our community and trigger some reflection and some compassion amongst our community, because I know that Jersey is a compassionate place, and I believe that Jersey values mean that we will protect and safeguard vulnerable parts of our community and not attack them. So Deputy Renouf listed some various kind of historic and famous trans people. And someone that came to mind for me last night, does anyone remember Hayley from Coronation Street? She was a trans woman, right? And I remember watching Coronation Street with my family when I was a young child. And this character, Hayley, she was just a part of the community. And I don't remember there being all of this negative rhetoric about this character. In fact, she was much loved. And I would ask people to actually reflect why that might be and why that cultural change, why has it happened? Because it's not actually coming from ordinary people. It's coming from somewhere outside of us. And so I'll turn now to children, because of course this guidance is about children, and it's about children in schools and what is actually happening in the schools. And it doesn't focus on, the CAST report, which has been quoted, didn't actually focus on education at all. It was about health services. Nevertheless, the CAST report has figures in there which are very small figures. I think it's either 0.3 or 3% who detransition. And yes, that's different from desistance. But the studies quoted by a previous speaker that place desistance at 85%. If we look at the hierarchy of evidence, those are old studies from decades ago. They were very small numbers, less than 100 people. And actually some of them were taking children who were effeminate and were sent to clinics. They weren't children who themselves were gender questioning. Those studies are not reliable, and that 85% figure is not reliable. And I agree, sir, that we should talk about safeguarding. And actually, when I was getting all my papers together for this from my pigeonhole, I accidentally picked this up. And this, sir, is my certificate from the safeguarding training that I did, that I booked and attended myself last year. And my safeguarding training is up to date, and I would urge all members to go and seek out that training. And I wonder if some of the speakers who are talking about safeguarding so much, whether their own training is actually up to date. But Sarah, I'm a primary school teacher. I've always had knowledge and expertise about safeguarding. I've looked through this guidance, and this guidance is excellent. It's been put together by a group of compassionate and diverse people. All views have been listened to. I'm confident that that is the case. There isn't any silence. I think Deputy Wall mentioned that there was silence on trans children. There's no silence. There's no, we're not trying to cancel anybody or suppress any views. People have been listened to, and those views have been weighed up and given due consideration, and the guidance, it is robust. And there's no encouragement to move towards a medical pathway. The guidance only kicks in when a child approaches a teacher. There are no teachers in schools saying to children, oh, I think you might be gender questioning. Come and join our LGBTQ plus group. I think one of the previous quotes was they want children to transition to be part of their group. And coming from somebody with a legal mind, I think that's called supposition, isn't it? Because it's a complete invention of an intention, which is just absolutely false and a bit insulting, actually. Children, if they do approach a teacher and they say, I've got some questions about my gender identity, they're viewing that teacher as a safe person, as they should do in our schools. The first thing that teacher is advised to do by the guidance is to encourage the child to talk to their parents, which is the opposite of what some people would have us believe. Parents are not being denied that information. There is encouragement to talk to parents. There is support and education for the parents. There will be very, very rare incidences where children might not be safe to talk to their parents. And Deputy Renner pointed out that in the 80s, we had similar moral panic about gay people and lesbians and bi people, and children at the time would have been scared to come out to their parents in the same way. So we must give them gender questioning children the same respect. I've got 3 minutes left, sir, and I've got more than 3 minutes of material, so I'll try to speed up a bit. So what actually happens? I'm going to quote some of the words from an educator. The current guidance is balanced. It has significant strength in this balanced approach. It's non-prescriptive and optional. So my words now, sir. It doesn't have this single pathway that other speakers have described. It's nuanced. It describes taking into account the child's individual circumstances, the circumstances of the class. And if there were children in that class who had some concerns about anything that was put in place, they would be listened to as well. Teachers are educated, intelligent people. We have to have 2 degrees to be a teacher. I think we need to put a bit more faith in our teachers. And this educator said, at a time when they had a student socially transition, before this guidance, there was a lack of clear central guidance. So this educator spent a lot of their time and resources prioritising what to do, but that's avoided now that they have the guidance. And in the same way as any other centrally agreed guidance, with wide consultation, including people with lived experience, they're happy with the guidance. And they state, and I remind members, all of our schools are rights-respecting schools. They state that this guidance supports the UNCRC. And I wanted to address the question of what if a child changes their mind, because some of the arguments against have focused on this. If a child might potentially change their mind, or does change their mind, that this guidance somehow has put them on a path. Not true, sir. There is no pathway involved in this guidance. There is no medical pathway. Other speakers have made this very clear. Children cannot access any medications, they cannot access any surgeries. There is no medical pathway. If, when they hit 18, they do want to do that, they don't just automatically get access to medications and surgery. It takes years, it can take up to a decade. And it's a very rigorous process. You would first have to go and see a psychologist. I trust psychologists, okay? It's a regulated profession. We've had this discussion. It's a regulated profession. You would have to receive a diagnosis from a psychologist, and only then could you be referred to an endocrinologist. And sir, that's not an easy process to go through. It's not something that somebody does lightly. I have confidence that the current guidance is reasonable. I think it is safeguarding all children in schools, and I ask members to vote against this proposition.
Thank you, Deputy Doublé. The next speaker is Deputy Mezek.
Thank you, sir, and I'm very pleased to follow that previous speaker, every word of which, as she said, I completely agreed with. There's a starting point that's quite problematic, sir, and that is the mistitling of this proposition, where it calls itself Treating Children as Children, when it should actually be titled Treating Children as Props in a Culture War, because that's what the debate actually is about. And I want to start by saying just how sad that is, that with all of the issues facing the island, all of the struggles that we all share in, no matter what our backgrounds are, and the efforts that are required from the leaders of the island to address those problems, instead we're spending parliamentary time on pandering to people outside the island who want to persecute a tiny minority of children, people who don't even have the agency to stand up for themselves. Isn't that so sad that we end up doing that? But
Deputy, sorry, I'm told we're not quorum. Could I invite members to come back into the chamber, because currently we are not quorum. I will invite members again. Please come back into the chamber. Thank you. Deputy Mezek, please continue.
Thank you, sir. I think there's one central reason why the proposition should be rejected, but I have a backup reason just in case that one's not good enough. But the central reason why the proposition should be rejected is that old saying, if something ain't broke, don't fix it. And the guidance that we have now has nothing wrong with it, and nothing has been proven to be wrong with it, and much of the concerns that are raised we find are either not based in fact or are simply manufactured from a rather sinister ideology. The guidance that the department currently has been co-produced, it's been through iterations, it has been consulted with by people who would be directly affected by it and those who would be required to apply it, and it's up for periodic review every now and then. No problems with any of that, that's exactly the way that kind of thing is meant to be done. And it hasn't given rise to a single actual issue in our Jersey schools. There haven't been complaints, there haven't been issues that have caused a crisis in a school where, because of the application of this guidance, something problematic or damaging has actually happened. The issues that are raised around it are simply not real. And when we have some of those emails to us complaining about what it says about toilets, what it says about the exclusion of parents, what it says about this or that, they can't actually cite an instance where that's caused a problem. The problem exists in their heads, not in the real world. And in making the arguments at the start of this debate, the proposer raised so many issues that are simply not relevant. The medicalisation, a complete irrelevancy to this guidance, because it isn't connected to that at all. So that is the central reason why the proposition should be rejected. It's aiming to fix something that isn't broken. But sir, if you didn't agree with that, or you weren't in 100% agreement with that at the very least, and you thought that, you know, maybe there is still some tweaking that could be done to get us further along the line, which is a perfectly reasonable opinion to have. The backup reason for why the proposition should be rejected is that the alternative proposed is so much worse. We are being asked to completely bypass the usual procedure for writing guidance for how children ought to be treated in our schools, to instead adopt through our parliamentary process a document that has been written by activists in the UK with no qualifications in this area and no experience in Jersey schools at all. It is unquestionable that that is the wrong approach, and it would be irresponsible of this States Assembly to adopt that approach in this instance. If it were applied to any other kind of guidance that we issue for schools, we'd be laughed out the room for it because it would be such an absurd suggestion. And of course, sir, there is a great irony, sir, in those who you would usually expect to defend Jersey's autonomy when it comes to a culture war will outsource decision-making to activist groups in the UK, which is completely inconsistent. I mentioned in my speech yesterday the two reasons why, or the two aspects that we find in this proposed alternative guidance that are so harmful, and I want to elaborate on one of those a little bit more, but the first one was one I won't say anymore because I think Deputy Ranov said it so well in his speech yesterday, that the guidance will create situations where it will be compulsory to expose children to harm, where children may identify themselves to their teachers and have to refer to their background and the concerns they may have. You know, it might be that they're from a family that has members of it who might have extremist views that they would cause great difficulty to that child and their safeguarding at home if they felt that the child might be trans. This guidance says that's irrelevant, that child must be exposed to that harm anyway, and we must tell the teachers. That's obviously a ridiculous thing to do and completely incompatible with the principles of safeguarding. But the other element to that I wanted to elaborate on is that there's a really silly issue in this that they seek to make such a big issue where it ought not to be, and create a new rule that will require teachers to bully children in their schools. And that's on the issue of naming children. Something that ought to be a complete non-issue, but will be made an issue by this. So lots of people go by different names to what their legal names are. It's a totally normal thing. Some of us may go home and listen to the music of Alice Cooper or Sting or Meatloaf, and then a smaller group of us will lose their minds at the idea that a child at school might be asked to be called something different to what their legal name is. It's crazy. I just want to use one example, sir, and I'll apologise to Jersey's trans community for talking about this through my own self-actualisation, because I'm a cisgendered person. I don't have the experience of what it's like to be gender questioning, but I hope they'll forgive me because of what point I'm about to make. But so when I was a teenager, I simultaneously decided to stop going by my legal name and adopt a different name. I decided to grow my hair long. I decided to get my ears pierced, and even on occasion, I sometimes used to wear a little bit of eyeliner. In other words, sir, I chose to adopt a gender-neutral name at the same time as changing my appearance to be more what some would consider stereotypically feminine. And what happened in school, sir, is when we had a new teacher, they'd read the register on the first day and they'd say my name, and I'd just politely say, I prefer to go by Sam, actually. And the teachers, every single time, went, okay. And that was the last I ever heard about it. But this guidance will say that if a child wants to change their name because of a gender-related reason, the teacher will not be allowed to do that. That causes so many issues. It causes an issue with teachers, firstly, having to judge whether it could be a gender issue that is that's provoked a child to ask to go by a different name, rather than it just being an ordinary nickname or anything else. So straight away, you've got a teacher panicking over whether they can do what the child has very respectfully requested and what would be normal in any other circumstance, or the choice to make an issue out of it, where all of that could go wrong. And so when I was at school going through that, if a teacher had wanted to challenge that with me, I would have told them to mind their own business, and I'd have probably been a bit more succinct than that, sir. Because it was none of their business. I can be called what I want to be called and display myself how I want to be displayed. So that rule could well have put me in an instance where I'm at conflict with my teachers, causing aggravation, rather than being educated, which is the purpose for being there. So that rule, sir, is utterly senseless, and it has been concocted by people who don't live in the real world, who are consumed by an ideology that, when put up against real-world circumstances, completely falls apart, making such an issue over kids choosing to go by a different name when it ought not to be an issue, and most of the time will be totally fine. These people don't live in the real world, and it is unquestionable that this guidance should not be adopted for that reason alone, let alone all the other ones there are. And I think we do need to be a bit harsh on those that have produced this guidance and where it's coming from. There were questions before about whether they could be defined as a hate group. Well, whatever your conclusion is on that, I have to say that I think their positioning is actually quite sadistic, where of all the things we could expend our human energy on trying to make life better, there are some people who just seem obsessed with making a small minority of children a bit more miserable. What a waste of energy. How does that make the world a better place? It is, in my view, quite sadistic. And because they're so relentless about it, they will find that there will never be any satisfying of that sadistic view, sir, because no matter how hard these people try to make the world reflect what they believe, which is that trans people don't really exist, they will always fail because trans people do exist, and no measure will ever be strong enough to satisfy that. You can tell teachers not that they can't call children by the names they want to be asked. You can deny people the right to choose what version of a school uniform they wear. You can deny people the right for legal recognition. You can deny people all of these things, but it won't change who those people actually are, because what they are is an innate human characteristic that cannot be eliminated. And it won't stop at this. It will go to the next step, and then the next step, and then the next step. Some members have mentioned Section 28 of the Local Government Act in the UK, which prohibited the promotion of homosexuality, but in reality meant it prohibited the acknowledgement of homosexuality and all of the difficulties that caused. We need to be frank about what that law did. That law killed people, because there were people who could not access information about health treatment, about preventative things, and all the rest, bearing in mind that was the time of the HIV AIDS epidemic. People whose lives could have been saved if the government had not been banned from providing those people information and help and treatment. That law killed people. And so an attempt to suppress trans people will have the same effect. Deputy Balash, on the very long list of incorrect things he said in his speech, he talked about adults choosing to be trans. He's not correct about that. Nobody chooses to be trans in the same way you don't choose to be left-handed. It's an innate human characteristic. You have no choice in who you are. That is just who you are. But he asked the question about the adult trans people who've engaged in this debate with us and asked why they would engage when technically it doesn't affect them. Well, so the reason they've engaged there is because rather than the sadism on the other side, they are empathetic because they know what it's like, because they've been through it. And an adult trans person comes from a child trans person. That's what they always were, and people go on a different journey to discover who they actually are, but they are interested because it's their experience and they know the effect it can have, and they want to make life better for succeeding generations, and they should be commended for that. And so I think they will be commended. I have to say I'm optimistic that this proposition, when it comes to the vote, will be consigned to the scrap heap where it belongs. And those who thought that they could come to Jersey to stoke a culture war and use this place as a test bed for their campaigns in other places to make life miserable for other people will walk away with a bloody nose from it, because this assembly will have said no to that division. And I hope, sir, that trans people in Jersey, having gone through this unnecessary stress and anxiety given to them by a states member who has got so much wrong in the lead up to this, having heard the solidarity from so many members of this assembly and having seen what I hope will be a resounding defeat for this proposition, I hope they will feel a spring in their step, some wind in their sails, and some satisfaction that despite how nasty and ugly the culture wars can be when they are stoked by those who have no real solutions to the problems our society is facing, that things will get better. The arc of history does curve towards justice, and sometimes things do get worse before they get better. And so I know, sir, as it has been the case for my parents' lifetime, having seen a transformation, I sound a bit emotional about this, sir, the transformation we've seen for gay people, we will see for trans people. And in decades to come, we'll look back on these days as dark days, but over, and move towards a situation where everybody lives their life with human dignity. And bring it on, sir, I hope that happens sooner rather than later, and we can start by getting rid of this proposition.
Thank you, Deputy Mezek. Does any other member wish to speak on Deputy Alves?
Thank you, sir. And I'd like to talk about the real-life consequences of adopting this proposition from the lived reality of those who work with young people every day. So I taught in secondary schools for many years. I sat with children in crisis, children who are frightened, children who are trying to understand themselves. And I have had many pupils disclose deeply personal matters in circumstances where informing parents would not have been appropriate and certainly not safe. The existing guidance recognises this reality. It clearly states confidentiality should only be compromised to safeguard a child or young person. It also makes an important safeguarding distinction. A child or young person from being LGBTQ+ or exploring their gender identity does not in itself constitute a safeguarding concern. These are not ideological statements. They are safeguarding principles rooted in the day-to-day work of teachers, counsellors and pastoral staff. By contrast, the proposed guidance we are being asked to adopt frames a child's disclosure of gender questioning as something inherently suspicious. It states, a disclosure of trans identity may be an indication of a safeguarding concern, and it insists that informing parents must always be the default position. So this is not a neutral shift. It fundamentally alters the relationship between young people and the adults they trust. Let me illustrate some scenarios. A student goes to a trusted teacher and says, please don't tell my parents, they'd throw me out. Under the current guidance, the teacher can keep that confidence unless there is a clear safeguarding risk to the child. And we heard yesterday from Deputy Reniff that he had heard from a member of our trans community who knew several young people who had been made homeless by their parents due to their trans identities. Sir, I have personally had children tell me things that they have never told anyone and that they would never want their parents to know. And I have respected their wishes because as a teacher, a trained professional with safeguarding qualifications, I am fully qualified to make an assessment and judgment as to what would be considered a risk to that child. Under the proposed guidance, however, I would be compelled to inform the parents unless I can prove an existing safeguarding concern not to. The risk here is obvious. Outing a child into an unsafe home can lead to emotional abuse, homelessness, or violence. And once children see this happen, they will stop confiding in staff altogether. I have taught pupils, sir, whose attendance improved dramatically once staff used their chosen name and pronouns. The existing guidance recognises this as a legitimate form of support. Allowing a trans pupil to socially transition is a means to enable them to explore their gender identity safely. The proposed guidance, however, rejects this entirely, saying children should not be compelled to use wrong sex pronouns. Teachers should not use the term transgender to refer to children. For some pupils, sir, that will mean a return to school refusal, anxiety, and disengagement from learning altogether, as we heard from Deputy Dublé yesterday, who quoted a parent of a child who experienced this. If pupils know that any disclosure about gender will be treated as a safeguarding concern and reported to parents, they will simply stop talking. If pupils believe teachers cannot be trusted with sensitive information, safeguarding collapses, not just for gender questioning pupils, for all pupils. So, and when they stop talking about gender, they will also stop talking about bullying, self-harm, abuse, or mental health struggles. This debate is about safeguarding. It is about whether we trust the professionals who work with children every day. It's about whether we create an environment where pupils feel safe to speak to us, or one where they stay silent until a crisis occurs. So earlier this week, I attended a Building a Safer Community Basque Delivery Framework meeting with the Home Affairs Minister. We spoke about a variety of things, but ultimately my take from that meeting was that we should be doing everything we can to foster a caring, compassionate and considerate island community. We should all want to live in a community where everyone feels safe, looked after and empowered to stand up for kindness. The existing guidance is not perfect, no guidance ever is, but it is rooted in the realities of school life, in the principles of confidentiality, proportionality, and compassion. And to remind members again, it is a working document which will be reviewed in March next year and will be updated, as is the case with all guidance. The proposed guidance, however, whatever its intentions, would cause real harm to real children. So, watching a child go from expected to fail their maths GCSEs to flourishing and achieving good grades across the board, there is no feeling like it. It's such a phenomenal, positive and heartwarming experience that I have had the privilege of seeing firsthand, and all simply because they felt accepted. Finally, sir, I want to say sorry to the trans community. I'm sorry for the anxiety and distress that having this debate hanging over us for weeks has caused. And I hope that if nothing else, that we have shown that you have allies, that we see you, we value you, and we care. I urge members to reject this proposition. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy Alves. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? If no other member wishes to speak, then I close the debate and I call upon Deputy Balash to reply.
So if I were to respond to every point that has been made in this debate, we would be here for a very long time, and I'm not going to do that. Although I must say that Deputy Mezek does do his best by the giving of outrageous statements to drive one into a position where one feels obliged to reply. Treating children as props in a culture war, culture wars, and treating this island as a test bed for their ideology. I'm not going to go down that road and deal with the many points of mischaracterization of the proposed guidance, nor the motivations of those who drafted it. I shall not detain members for long, but there are some things that I think need to be said. The first is that I do not regret bringing this proposition, but I do regret that it has been portrayed by some members as an attack upon the local trans community. It is not and never has been an attack upon that community, which is as entitled as any minority group in Jersey to respect, consideration, and freedom from discrimination, as indeed I believe is the case. I regret too that Deputy Renouf considered the proposition to be divisive. This debate, as I said at the outset, is about how to treat that small number of gender questioning children in our schools. Sadly, few of the speakers have addressed that subject in any meaningful way, although we have had some thoughtful speeches this morning, in particular from Deputies Miles and Wall. I also regret that Deputy Doublé referred to hate groups because we don't have any hate groups in Jersey, thank heavens. The linking of a comment on hate groups to groups outside Jersey coming and seeking to influence views was, I think, extremely unhelpful. But I will take it from Deputy Doublé that she is not stating that either the Transgender Trend organisation or the Women's Right Group in Jersey is a hate group, and I invite her to correct me if I've got that wrong. The Constable of St. Martin was wrong to portray the proposition or my report as an attack upon civil servants. I had a very cordial discussion with a senior civil servant in the Education Department about this proposition, and I'm very confident that she did not feel under any attack from me. The Minister made several statements with which I entirely agree. That safeguarding was non-negotiable, that every group should be treated with respect, that gender questioning children were a very small, vulnerable group which should be kept safe. We found common ground there, and I must say that it is regrettable that the amendment of Deputy Gorst, which sought to build upon common ground and to try to create a situation where differences could be identified and addressed was not accepted by the Assembly. I do accept that there were some technical errors in the proposed guidance, which is why the first amendment gives the Minister power to modify the proposed guidance if it were accepted. Deputy Stevenson spoke of her subcommittee's conclusion, but she does not seem to be aware that in England the Department of Education is now treating the issue of gender questioning children not as one of equality and inclusion, but as lying firmly within the wider safeguarding framework of the KCSIE guidance. That reflects the conclusions of the CAS review, which recommended caution and an evidence-based assessment. In England, the guidance, proposed guidance, will have practical consequences, and decisions will be child-centred, but not child-led. It is exactly what was recommended by Stephanie Davis-Arrey in treating children as children. Deputy Mezek, and I think the Minister as well, were rather rude about the qualifications of the author of this guidance. This is a woman who was awarded the honour of a British Empire Medal for services to the safeguarding of children. I doubt that Deputies Mezek and Ward are better qualified. I don't understand why the Minister believes that Jersey should depart so significantly from the evidence-led approach endorsed by the CAS review and now followed by the UK Department of Education and other parts of the British Isles and indeed even Guernsey. The existing guidance is flawed. Its flexibility, endorsed by Deputy Renouf in terms of separate spaces for children of a different sex, is actually illegal. Contrary to the views of the Minister, the Supreme Court judgment last year represents the law of Jersey. And if the Attorney General were here, he would be able to confirm that if the Minister took the trouble to ask him. If ministers reject this proposition, they will be endorsing guidance which is in part unlawful in its approach and more generally swimming against the tide of current thinking as to how to treat these vulnerable children. The Minister says there will be a review in 2027. I can only express the hope that his successor will be more open-minded and willing to listen to other points of view than has been demonstrated in this debate. I maintain the proposition and I ask for the appel.
Thank you, Deputy Balash. The appel has been called for, so I ask members to return to their seats. If all members have had the opportunity of returning to their seats, I ask the greffier to open the voting. If members have had the chance of casting their votes, I ask the greffier to close the voting. can announce that the proposition has been rejected. 5 votes for, 35 votes contre, and 5 abstentions.
Those members voting for the Conotab of St Bernard, Trinity and St Saviour, and Deputies Balash and Barbara Ward, and those members abstaining, Deputies Labby, Luce, Gorst, Rose Binet and Tom Binet.
Very well. The next item of public business is the draft Sea Fisheries Atlantic Bluefin Tuna Jersey Regulations, which is P21, which has been lodged by the Minister for the Environment. The main respondent is the Chair of the Environment, Housing and Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel, and I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft Sea Fisheries Atlantic Bluefin Tuna Jersey Regulations 2000. The states make these regulations under Articles 2, 7, 12, 13, 27 and 29 of the Sea Fisheries Jersey Law 1994.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. Sir, today I ask the Assembly to endorse a move to allow a carefully controlled recreational fishery to be established in the island for Atlantic bluefin tuna. This is achieved through the making of a regulation, the draft Sea Fisheries Atlantic Bluefin Tuna Jersey Regulations, and an amendment to the Sea Fisheries Licensing of Fishing Boats Jersey Regulations 2003. The opening of this fishery reflects both our commitment to a sustainable marine management and our island's long relationship with the sea. As all members will be aware, Atlantic bluefin tuna have returned to UK and Channel Island waters in recent years. After their numbers declined dramatically in the 1960s, and thanks to decades-long international conservation efforts, the stock is now in a recovered state. In 2021, the International Union for Conservation of Nature reclassified bluefin tuna from a status of endangered to a status of least concern, a milestone made possible through responsible stewardship and scientific collaboration. When these fish first burst back into the scene in Jersey, we followed the precautionary principle and protected them through the wildlife law until local and international research could give assurance of a stable population. Since the 2021 Trade and Cooperation Agreement between the United Kingdom and the European Union, the UK has received an annual allocation of bluefin tuna quota. The International Commission for the Conservation of Atlantic Tuna, or ICAT, oversees the global management of this species, and the Marine Management Organisation implements these decisions within British waters. Under ICAT's 2025-2028 framework, the UK has been allocated 230 tonnes of quota each year, divided between commercial, recreational and bycatch provisions. As a Crown dependency, Jersey is represented internationally by the United Kingdom. During the Brexit negotiations, the UK became a contracting party to the ICAT Convention, the treaty that establishes the rights and obligations governing bluefin tuna management. With the Government of Jersey's consent, this convention was formally extended to Jersey in May 2025. This extension ensures that Jersey vessels can participate in this sustainably managed fishery within our territorial waters. In 2025, DEFRA and the Government of Jersey jointly authorised a limited number of charter vessels to target bluefin tuna in our waters. These activities, strictly controlled and monitored, have shown both the potential and the responsibility required in managing such a valuable species. For 2026, I propose to extend access to all fishing stakeholders, consistent with the UK approach. Doing so will support diversification in our fishing industry and deliver tangible benefits to our coastal communities. However, We know that with opportunity comes responsibility. ICAT requires all contracting parties to ensure that recreational vessels fishing for bluefin tuna operate under an authorisation system. This is essential to maintaining a well-managed, sustainable fishery. To meet these obligations, I propose to amend the Sea Fisheries Licensing of Fishing Boats Jersey Regulations 2003. This update will allow us to issue recreational authorisations for catch and release bluefin tuna fishing. Such authorisations are a common practice for fishery and a common practice in fisheries management. Jersey already uses similar systems for other species such as scallops. Authorisations ensure that only eligible vessels can target a species and that activity will be closely managed and controlled in order to meet international fisheries standards. These authorisations also ensure the correct number of fishing vessels have access to a fishery with enforceable licence conditions attached to them. Without authorisations, fisheries can be exploited at unsustainable levels, and Jersey would be breaching the ICAT Convention. This proposal, sir, is not only an opportunity for our island's marine economy, but a continuation of Jersey's strong record in sustainable marine stewardship. By taking this step, we honour our international commitments, support our fishing community, and help secure a future in which bluefin tuna remain a thriving part of our marine environment. I propose the principle, sir.
Thank you, Minister. Are the principles seconded? Does any member wish to speak on the principles? Deputy Joe.
Thank you, sir. I will start by saying that supporting these regulations is not something I've come to entirely comfortably. Atlantic bluefin tuna have been on the endangered list for decades, and for many of us, they represent a stark example of what happens when natural resources are overexploited. That history should not be forgotten as we consider this step today. But equally, this story is not only one of decline, it is also one of recovery. It shows that conservation can work, that with international cooperation, strong regulation and sustained effort, species can recover. As David Attenborough has said in his latest Oceans film project, if we can give the marine environment the chance, it can recover, often faster than we expect. The challenge for us, therefore, is finding the right balance between protection and sustainable use. Last summer, the panel was invited to spend some time with the Marine Resources team to see firsthand the work that underpins this proposal. We discussed this issue at length, not just the opportunity, but also the risks. What gave me great reassurance is that Jersey is not acting in isolation. We are operating within a highly regulated international framework under ICAT, with clear rules, external oversight and ongoing monitoring. And that matters. It means this is not a free-for-all, it's controlled and evidence-based. As chair of the Environment, Housing Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel, I can confirm that the panel is broadly supportive of the introduction of a licensed recreational catch and release scheme. So we recognise that if done correctly, this presents an opportunity to support the fishing industry to diversify, initially through recreational fishing and potentially in time through carefully managed commercial opportunities. However, sir, our support is not without qualifications. Firstly, there remains uncertainty around quota allocation. Jersey does not hold its own quota and is reliant on the United Kingdom's share under ICAT. At present, there is still no confirmed allocation for Jersey. This means the extent of economic benefit is not yet fully understood, and expectations must be managed accordingly. Secondly, the panel wishes to emphasise the importance of robust safeguards within the recreational scheme. Catch and release is often viewed as low impact, but we have been clear that the post-release mortality can occur if it is not done properly. Therefore, this scheme must be underpinned by strict licensing conditions, mandatory training and effective monitoring and reporting. This is essential not only for the protection of the species, but for Jersey's credibility within the international framework. Thirdly, we must view this in the context of the next step, as the Minister outlined, which is commercial catch and land fishing. While the panel supports efforts to diversify the fishing industry, this requires strong oversight, appropriate infrastructure, and a clear plan to ensure Jersey secures maximum value for any quota. That framework is still in development. And this amendment represents both an opportunity and a responsibility. An opportunity to support the fishing industry, develop a specialist high-value market for Jersey, and to participate in a recovering fishery. But also a responsibility to ensure that we do not repeat the mistakes of the past. If we proceed, we must do so with rigour, caution, and a clear commitment to sustainability. So, sir, the panel is supportive of the Minister's amendments with these thoughts and caveats I've just outlined. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Jean. Chief Minister.
Thank you, sir. I'm aligned pretty much with the previous speaker, sir, so I make this relatively brief. Catch and release fishing can be beneficial, but only under the right conditions. It's not automatically harmless, and its value very much depends on how it's done. We have to remember that Atlantic bluefin tuna is still a vulnerable species. They have historically been overfished, but catch and release allows anglers to participate in fishery without removing fish from the population. From a scientific research point of view, and I'm not sure if the Minister is going to make this a provision or use some of the catch and release for this, many programs of tag and release tuna providing valuable, really valuable data on migration, growth, population, health, and this has been and will continue to be crucial in managing the species into the future. Of course, there is an economic value, which is always helpful. I think it's important if we're going to allow this. Recreational fishing tourism does generate income while keeping fish in the ecosystem, which can encourage sustainable growth. But as the Chair of Scrutiny said, not all fish survive. Stress, exhaustion, injury during capture can lead to delayed death, especially if the fight is long and the handling is poor. So, survival rates improve significantly when fish are landed quickly. The appropriate gear are used. They're kept in water, not hauled aboard. Barbless hooks are used. Handling time is minimal. And I'm sure the Minister has will be covering for all of those things. So when issuing permits. So overall, so yes, catch and release can be beneficial, particularly as part of a well-regulated fishery and scientific program. However, it's only truly positive when best practices are followed and mortality is kept very low. So perhaps the Minister, when summing up, would just reassure members on those points. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Minister. Constable St Saviour.
Thank you, sir. This is something I can obviously support, sir. It would be a great assistance to our long-suffering commercial fishing fleet. I have a question for the Minister, sir. If adopted, the regulations come in to effect 7 days after they are agreed. There is a question regarding quotas, which we have with the UK. My question to the Minister is, will such permits and permissions be held in abeyance until such times as quotas are agreed with the UK? Thanks, sir.
Thank you, Conatap. Deputy Renouf.
So thank you. Like others who've spoken, I am supportive, but like the chair of the scrutiny panel, I'm also wary. Tuna returning to our waters is great news. I have been on the North Coast at Grone when people gathered because they could see tuna feeding offshore. And it was an amazing sight. There was the fish were breaking the water was frothing, seabirds, gannets and others were plummeting into the water around them. And it was quite a spectacle. I think we've almost forgotten what abundance in nature looks like. And I think it is a great thing that we have that back off our island and available to see. And I would suggest it's part of the attraction of Jersey that those sorts of things are possible. Members may also remember a few years ago social media footage of a tuna that had come virtually ashore at Plemont on the high tide and was swimming and was visible from the rocks, and people posted footage of that. and that was a very symbolic moment in terms of showing that the return of that species. And indeed, I know that surfers have seen them also on the west coast as well. So my comment about this is to urge the Minister to see how sport fishing works out before he races to a catch and kill industry. Because a well-functioning sport fishing industry is potentially lucrative. It is potentially does not damage the other aspects of the industry, of the benefit that comes from tuna being in our waters, which is a tourist element. Jersey is known for its nature, for its natural world, and the ability to see dolphins off the coast and other species like that. We now have lots of birds return, buzzards and so on, marsh harriers. This is part of what makes Jersey, part of its identity, part of what makes it a great place. So I would urge great caution for the next minister. If it is this minister again, then I urge caution on him to think very hard before we rush to a catch and kill industry. Jersey could be known for a different way of dealing with tuna. And I would say that if we do go to a catch and kill, we do risk the potentially slightly absurd situation where we license boats to catch and release, where the whole objective is to return the fish to the water alive in as best condition as possible, only for another boat to come up, sweeping up behind, and catch the same fish and chuck it in the back to be eaten. And you know, of those two scenarios, certainly at the moment, the one that seems most appealing to me, on economic grounds and on environmental grounds, would be the catch and release. I've got a couple of questions for the Minister. It would be helpful if the Minister could say a little bit more about his view about the wider picture. I'd be interested to know what the situation, I think members would be interested to know what the situation is in regards to French boats fishing for tuna in our waters. I think I know the answer to that, but I think it would be useful for the Minister to clarify it. And I'm also not clear about the relationship between the quota and catch and release. Is the quota that Jersey will get, assuming we get one, is the quota for catch and release, or for catch and kill, or for both? In other words, can it be divided? If we get a quota of 5 tons, can it be divided between the two? Or do we nominate which it is for? I think it would be very useful to know some of the mechanics around that. But I would just close by saying that I think it is a good news story. I hope that there can be a successful commercial catch and release, but I urge great caution about going further, because I think we have a reputation that we could build on the basis of conservation and sustainability.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? If no other member wishes to speak, then I close the debate and I call on the Minister to reply.
Thank you, sir, and I'll try to quickly address the various points made by members. I'll start with my scrutiny panel chair and say I'd like to thank her for supporting comments and just remind everybody that this debate today is specifically about recreational fishing, catching and releasing, and not commercial fishing, which is catching and killing. Chief Minister asked me a question about the requirements that will be put on recreationals. Well, the first thing I would say to him is there is going to be a £500 licence fee to go recreational fishing for bluefin tuna, and that will go a long way to, well, it will cover the costs of mandatory training. Anybody who wants to go out and catch and release bluefin tuna as a recreational fisherman will have to undergo training. They will have to have certain equipment on their boat, and that will all be very, very heavily monitored. So the equipment, the training, and other data gathering may well happen. Certainly my officers will continue to track bluefin tuna for scientific reasons using satellite tracking, which is what we've done recently. But I will also be considering the tracking of vessels which are permitted to catch and release tuna. So my officers, nobody else, my officers know where these vessels are at all times. I would say to members that during our scientific trials, we caught and released 15 tuna recently, in the last couple of years, and all of those fish survived. But there is an acceptance that around 1% may not survive catch and release, but bluefin tuna, if caught properly and with the right equipment and in the right way, are a really strong fish, and every possibility for them to return live. To the Constable of St Saviour, I'd just say there's no quota for catch and release. And to the Deputy Ranniff, who also asked that question, I would also add the answer that French boats cannot target bluefin tuna in our waters. You may well know that, but it's absolutely worth clarifying that so everybody is understanding of that. So in closing, I'd just like to say that either we take responsibility for the control of this fishery that's already allocated to us, or we lose the opportunity and the benefits that could come with it. Those benefits, if we don't take this chance, will pass to others. The Atlantic tuna stock is no longer endangered. It's recovered, it's sustainably managed under ICAT, and we have the chance here to use science and international mandate to act. By approving the regulations today, we're going to ensure that Jersey, not another contracting party, benefits from the quota already assigned to the UK. If we do nothing, our share of the sustainably managed resource will simply be reallocated somewhere else. Worse, without a legal controlled framework in place, we risk the very outcomes that we want to avoid: untrained or illegal fishing, unavoidable harm to this valuable species, or even worse still, dead tuna washing up on our beaches due to improper handling or the use of improper fishing gear. This regulation protects us against this. It moves bluefin tuna management into the appropriate sea fisheries framework, where enforceable licence conditions, vessel authorisations, mandatory training and monitoring can ensure responsible, high welfare catch and release activity. It provides the tools we need to protect the species properly, not rely on a wildlife law that was never designed to manage complex, quota-based, internationally regulated fisheries. Most importantly, this move places Jersey firmly within the international management system for this species, honouring our commitments under the ICAT Convention and ensuring our fishers have fair, authorised access to a stock they have helped to conserve. I say to members, here's a chance to show leadership, responsibility and some vision, a chance to protect and not to exploit one of the world's most remarkable species under highly strict standards of sustainable management. If we don't act, the fishery will still go ahead, but it will go ahead without us. I urge the Assembly to support these regulations and ask for the appel on the principle, sir.
Thank you, Minister. The appel is called for. So I ask members who've not already done so to return to their seats. So if all members have returned to their seats, I ask the greffier to open the voting. If all members have had the opportunity of casting their votes, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. And the principles have been adopted. 45 votes pour, 1 vote contre, and no abstentions. Deputy Jeune, does the Environment, Housing and Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel wish to scrutinise this matter?
No, sir.
Thank you. Very well, when we move on to second reading, to debate the regulations. Minister, how do you wish to propose the regulations
I'd like
in
to
second
propose
reading?
more blocks, so I don't think there's very much more to say on the matter.
Very well. Does any member wish to speak on the regulations? If no member wishes to speak, then I close the debate. Minister, do you wish to reply? Those members who are in favour of adopting the regulations kindly show. Those against? The regulations are adopted. you wish to propose the matter in third reading, Minister?
I do, sir.
Does anyone wish to speak in third reading? Deputy Renouf.
Yes, I will reiterate my support, but there was one other point I wanted perhaps the Minister to clarify, which might be helpful, is just if there's been any discussion with Guernsey in relation to this and what the situation is in Guernsey, whether there's any shared work going on and so on, whether the fleet are sharing resources or anything like that. May not be strictly relevant to third reading, but I hope you'll permit that.
I should have asked also, were the regulations seconded? Yes. In both second and third reading, yes. Thank you. Any other member wish to speak in third reading? And I call upon the Minister to reply.
Thank you, sir, and I'll be brief. I wanted to start by thanking my officers for the enormous amount of work they've had to do to get Jersey into a position where we've been authorised by ICAT to act, and where the UK can proportion to us some quota. It's not been a couple of months' work. It's been years of research and hard graft, coming up with all the information required by ICAT in order for us to be part of this fishery. So I'm grateful to them for that. And it leads me very easily into the answer to the Deputy Renouf about Guernsey. And while we have now got to where we want to be, and part of ICAT, Guernsey are yet to get there. I know they're working on it, and it's very much in both islands' interest to be in a similar position. So we very much welcome Guernsey getting into that process and getting to an equivalence with us, because it may get quite complicated in certain instances if somebody catches a fish in Jersey waters and drifts over the line before they get it onto the boat. That at the moment I'm not aware. I'm aware might not be allowed. So the quicker Guernsey can reach the same standards as us, the better. We're certainly talking to them, helping them where we can. With that, sir, I would just thank everybody for their support and ask for the appel in the third reading.
Thank you. The appel's been called for. As members to return to their seats. Members have returned to their seats. Then I ask the greffier to open the voting. If all members have had the chance to cast their votes, I ask the greffier to close the voting. I can announce that the regulations have been adopted in third reading. 44 votes pour, 1 vote contre, and no abstentions.
Deputy Tadier voted contre.
The next item of public business is the Draft Planning and Building Amendment Law, P22, 2026, and that's again lodged by the Minister for the Environment. The main respondent again is the Chair of the Environment, Housing and Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel. So I'll ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft Planning and Building Jersey Amendment Law 2000, a law to further amend the Planning and Building Jersey Law 2002 and repeal the Planning and Building COVID-19 Bridging Island Plan Jersey Order 2021. The states, subject to the sanction of His Most Excellent Majesty and Council, have adopted the following law.
Thank you. Minister.
Thank you, sir. So today I present the Draft Planning and Building Jersey Amendment Law. This proposes a set of pragmatic, forward-looking changes to strengthen the way we plan for Jersey's future. I'm grateful to both the Environment, Housing and Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel and the PPC for their submission of supportive comments for my proposition. At its core, this draft amendment law restores an important ability that once existed in an earlier version of the Planning and Building Law. This is the power for the Minister to bring forward an interim revision of an island plan during the plan's lifetime without undertaking a full island plan review. This would enable change to part of an island plan, whether that be a single policy or a section of the plan during the plan period. This provision was removed from the planning framework during the COVID-19 response. through the COVID-19 Island Plan Jersey Regulations 2021. Now that our planning system is no longer operating under emergency arrangements, it's both timely and sensible to reinstate this flexibility, not only for the current Bridging Island Plan, but for the island plans of the future as well. So why does this matter? It matters because the world doesn't stand still. As we experience on an almost daily basis currently, external shocks occur, economic conditions shift, and new priorities emerge. Or it might just be that we find some island plan policies are not working as we originally intended. Sir, a planning system that cannot respond to change is one that risks becoming outdated, unhelpful, or misaligned with the island's real needs. Allowing targeted partial amendments to the island plan gives us a more adaptive and resilient planning framework. It enables us to respond more quickly to changing circumstances without the significant cost, time, and resource burden of a full island plan review. In short, it gives us the ability to ensure that the island plan is agile, responsive, and remains up to date. We're not alone in looking at how we might change parts of the development plan to ensure its updatedness. Similar provisions have already been introduced in Scotland, and the principle of changing part of a plan during its plan period has recently been supported in Guernsey. However, flexibility must be matched with rigour. The draft amendment law, therefore, also gives the States Assembly the power to make regulations that define the procedures for bringing forward a new island plan, an interim revision of a section or sections of the plan, or just specific targeted changes to parts of it, which might amount to a single policy. This ensures that changes, whatever their nature, scale, or significance, are supported by a clear and transparent process that is based on established and consistent principles of justification, consultation, independent examination, and political endorsement in this Assembly. These procedures, which remain to be finalised, will set out how island plan reviews and changes to an island plan must be conducted. Their preparation and subsequent scrutiny and endorsement will provide an opportunity to improve the process undertaken for a full island plan review, to ensure that islanders remain engaged and are consulted throughout the review process. It's essential that islanders are afforded ample opportunity to comment on all aspects of an island plan that might affect them, and this principle will be embedded within the new procedures. Introducing new procedures also gives us a chance to adopt proportionate ways of managing changes to an island plan. This could mean creating different rules for consultation, independent scrutiny and approval, depending on the scale, nature and significance of the proposed change. Taking this approach would offer the potential of saving time and reducing costs, while improving the overall efficiency and effectiveness of the planning system. Crucially, new processes that might be put in place to review or change an island plan will have to provide the appropriate checks and balances. This matter has, quite rightly, been identified by the scrutiny panel when it states that any new regulations must be accompanied by robust safeguards in respect of oversight and accountability. Changes to a plan will, of course, require proper justification, meaningful consultation and independent examination as it is appropriate, along with the necessary political oversight and approval in this Assembly, as I've mentioned. Most importantly, any regulations setting out how an island plan is to be changed or reviewed must be brought back to this Assembly for consideration and approval, if the Assembly approves the power to make the regulations today. The next Minister for the Environment will be required to present these regulations before beginning a full island plan review or before proposing any change to the existing Bridging Island Plan. If members are happy to back my proposition today, this will likely happen early in the next term of government. It's also likely that the draft regulations would be the subject of consultation, but of course that would be a matter for the next minister. Finally, the draft amendment law removes an unnecessary piece of legislation. The Planning and Building COVID-19 Bridging Island Plan Jersey Order 2021. That order has served its purpose and is no longer needed. Its removal has no policy implications as the Bridging Island Plan itself remains in force until this Assembly approves a new island plan to replace it. Before I conclude my remarks on the reforms of plan making, I want to address the points raised by the scrutiny panel in its comments regarding the wider planning service reform programme, of which these legislative changes before us today form only one part. This wider programme includes updating permitted development rights and reducing the need for planning permission for certain types of development. This work is well underway. I will be bringing forward the first package of these changes very shortly, and certainly before the end of this political term. Further work will continue into the next term to explore a second phase of general development order reforms or permitted development rights. The work completed so far has highlighted clear opportunities for continued deregulation and for improving the efficiency and effectiveness of Jersey's planning system. It provides a strong foundation for the next minister to consider the implementation of further positive change in this area. I've also reviewed the planning appeals system, which has remained unchanged since its introduction in 2015. Following public and industry consultation, I've published a set of proposals showing how beneficial improvements could be made. Some of these changes, where they require amendments to legislation, will be available for the next Environment Minister to take forward in the new term. Others, involving updated guidance and procedural improvements, are already being implemented. So, in conclusion, returning to the element of the Planning Service Reform Programme that concerns changes to plan making, which is the subject of the proposition before us today, may I conclude by saying that these proposals are measured, sensible, and in the interests of good planning. They restore flexibility and enhance the efficiency and responsiveness of our planning system. Crucially, they also enable the development of the procedures that will come back to this Assembly for scrutiny and approval, that will safeguard the integrity and transparency of any future changes to the island plan. This amendment provides the legal framework needed to strengthen the planning system's efficiency and effectiveness. It also aligns fully with the strategic priorities we set at the beginning of this term. It ensures that we have the tools to plan confidently and with agility for Jersey's future, particularly in a world where certainty can no longer be taken for granted. Sir, I commend the principles of this draft amendment law to the Assembly and ask for member support. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Are the principles seconded? Does any member wish to speak on the principles? Deputy Jeur.
Thank you, sir. And I rise briefly to outline the panel's position on this amendment law. This proposition reflects a lengthy and considered process of reviewing how the island plan operates. As members will be aware, the current Bridging Island Plan and the associated changes to the planning law were always intended to be temporary, with a return to more standard, longer-term approach. Through our hearings quarterly and a dedicated session on the Bridging Island Plan last summer, the panel heard clearly from the Minister about the need for greater flexibility, particularly the ability to amend individual elements of the island plan within its lifespan, rather than relying on full-scale reviews for even minor changes. We recognise that rationale. We also note that the government's own consultation on planning service reform identified this lack of flexibility and supported the introduction of streamlined processes and the ability to make partial amendments. In that context, the panel is broadly supportive of this proposition. However, sir, that support is not without qualifications. The Island Plan is one of the most significant policy documents we have. It shapes our homes, our environment, and our communities for years to come. While we understand the intention to improve efficiency and responsiveness, particularly in the face of climate and geopolitical pressures, the panel is clear that this must be balanced with appropriate oversight, transparency and accountability. Put simply, flexibility cannot come at the expense of democratic scrutiny. An important point in our comments, and as the Minister himself pointed out in his speech, that we have raised this in our comments. So the panel would also highlight that this is only one part of a wider package of planning reform, and other areas must continue to be progressed with equal priority, and I'm glad to hear an update from the Minister in these areas, and that he has given the Assembly that update today. And as we look ahead to the next island plan, it is important that flexibility is not an end in itself, but a means to deliver better outcomes for islanders. That means a clearer focus on building homes as part of sustainable communities, with local amenities, public open green space, community facilities, and safer routes for cyclists and pedestrians. It also means recognising that Jersey's environment should not end up being a secondary consideration. It is one of our island's greatest assets and a core part of our economic value, supporting tourism, agriculture, well-being, and our overall quality of life. Growth and development must therefore work with and not against that natural advantage. It means ensuring infrastructure keeps pace with the development, with a capital investment fund that is fit for purpose and able to support roads, drains, schools, and essential services alongside new housing development. In conclusion, sir, I support the direction of travel set out in this amendment law, but emphasise that any regulations that follow must include robust safeguards to ensure confidence in how the island plan is developed and amended in the future. And most importantly, that it delivers the kind of island we want to see: fair, sustainable, economically resilient and environmentally strong. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Next member to speak is Deputy Moore.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to start by thanking the Minister for taking this pragmatic action. I think it is a wise way to progress forward on this important issue. In saying that, I would like to appeal to any members who are successful in the forthcoming elections to correct an issue that was created with the publication of the Bridging Island Plan, and that is the existence of footnote 30. Footnote 30, in my view, contradicted the agreement of the former Assembly on an amendment that was successful. And the impact of this has been quite devastating for some of my constituents. In my view, this has caused harm to families who could have created additional units of accommodation in existing outbuildings on their properties in order to allow their younger family members to move into their main house, whilst the now grandparents would have been able to live right next door to their families so that they could each support each other through a new phase of life. I think it has been extremely sad and damaging that those families have not been able to achieve that under the current Bridging Island Plan. As I say, that was in contradiction to the amendment that I believe the Assembly agreed to when we spent a long time debating this in a former Assembly. And so with that, sir, I hope that a member of this Assembly will hear my plea, or perhaps somebody else who is not here today, but will take a seat in the next Assembly, and that we will be able to move forward and better offer support to families who wish to live alongside each other in our green zone and countryside areas. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy Moore. Next member to speak is Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to follow on from Deputy Moore about a comment on the process by which the Bridging Island Plan was produced and the legislation amended in order to produce it, because it has been a source of amusement, I believe, amongst planning consultants, why the original provisions were changed to basically disallow interim reviews, particularly bearing in mind that the Bridging Island Plan itself was just a temporary measure, dealt with certain aspects, more environmental aspects rather than, say, economic aspects of planning. And what basically happened was that provisions that allowed interim review. We had an example in the 2014 revision of the previous island plan. They were removed, which basically tied the department's hands. And part of this, if I might try and anticipate what the reason was, might have been because the actual revision process is quite cumbersome, and so that perhaps officers thought that, you know, therefore it should only happen every 10 years, notwithstanding that the Bridging Island Plan is a temporary plan. But, you know, we've gone full circle now, and we're bringing back this these provisions in. So my question for the Minister is, does he anticipate a less cumbersome process for review, and is he able to explain why these provisions were dropped in the first place? The other thing, I just wish to raise a question on is, bearing in mind that the Environmental and Housing Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel have raised this issue, that there is so much more work to be done in improving the planning law. Why hasn't there been an overhaul, a complete overhaul? That again may be to do with resourcing, but in particular, why hasn't this amendment just brought in a change so that the whole law can be amended by regulation? Because it's quite clear that there is further work that's anticipated. So rather than go back with an amendment to the Privy Council on these, you know, why hasn't there been an attempt to just simply modernise the law in that respect by allowing it to be amended by regulations brought before the States Assembly? So those are my questions for the Minister, so I'd be grateful if he could answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Scott. The next speaker is Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you, sir. I want to touch very briefly on the safeguard and the change in process. The Minister highlighted that this is in essence a re-implementation of a power previously held. And there is a subtle difference. I will be supporting this piece of what is enabling legislation. But it's worth casting members' minds back to the former way in which this operated. And there is a subtle but key difference. The law as it was in 2019 provided that the Minister shall prepare a draft island plan in Article 3. It was by order that processes regarding consultation and timelines were set out. PPC's comments refer to obviously the changes there. But key to the difference is that any revision or new island plan, so a draft revision, shall be laid to the states for approval. Ensuring that in primary legislation, any change, no matter how small to the plan, is one that was going to garner Assembly approval. When the scrutiny panel discussed these regulation-making powers with the Minister, he clarified that in setting regulations, which will be an Assembly decision, those could confer greater power to a Minister to do things without laying revisions before the Assembly. That is a key difference because right now every word that is ultimately approved goes through a process in which any states member could amend at the whole island plan, and any thematic or point review brought, for example, in the 2014 revision likewise could be amended. So my word is equally a word of caution that I think Deputy Jearn gave, which is in reviewing the regulations that will come forward, my personal consideration is there hasn't been justification for those regulations to provide or confer a power on the Minister to make changes outright to the plan without States Assembly approval. So members who are here after June should, I think, engage early in what these regulations look like, not treat what any Minister brings forward as a done deal. And I believe for good plan making and trust in the plan, it is essential that in essence, any change be laid before the Assembly, no matter how targeted, really. Members will know that the realities of implementing policies in the plan often debate on may or must or ands or ors or where commas or semicolons lie within paragraphs. Indeed, differing opinions on single policies like the demolition of buildings mean inspectors fall on the side that actually the PAT plan, arguably in the policy unit, consider may not have been how it was drafted. And whilst it may seem expedient to want to change that or do other things, I would urge caution that it is really important that no matter how small and no matter what consultation, changes to the plan as a document come back to this Assembly. And in drafting regulations, that the Minister asks his officers to do so. And I say so in the backdrop that he's identified he may not be taking that as his course of action at the moment, and that he may be considering that small amendments would be for a minister to change on their own. It is important when the minister talks about deregulation that the plan has an aim. The law has an aim. That aim was extended when the law was redrafted from the Island Planning Law to the Planning and Building Law. And if we turn back to 2002 to the proposition that originally proposed the primary legislation, it highlights that Article 2, purposes of the law, expands the law to conserve, protect and improve the natural resources and physical and natural environment of the island. That was explicitly a decision at the time to draft that in as a widening of the law and a recognition of the need for sustainable development. And as such, it should be this Assembly that makes changes to how the plan works.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak? Deputy Renouf.
Thank you, sir. And like Deputy Jeune and Deputy Alex Curtis, I have cautious support for this. And I would say I was considering a similar change when I was the Minister. As members may be aware, there were a few planning issues that came up during that time. I disagree with Deputy Scott to the extent that she says that the Bridging Island Plan was not a full process. It was a full process. It was a full 2-year process of commissioning reports, of having public inquiries. It was the full process that is carried on for a Bridging Island, for a normal island plan. The reason it was turned into a Bridging Island Plan was because COVID hit in the middle of the process, and at that point nobody knew what the relevance of a plan adopted in 2022 would be the next year or the year after. The world could have been very different. As we know, the world actually returned roughly to normal, but that wasn't what people thought or knew in 2022. So it was changed from a normal island plan to a Bridging Island Plan. But it could have been, if COVID hadn't hit, it would have been an island plan. And it was only changed in its naming and its duration because of that. So that's the reason why it was the naming was changed. The idea, I looked into this idea of why it wasn't possible to change the Bridging Island Plan as it had been in the past when I was Minister, because I did come under pressure to do that from within government. And so I spoke to officers about that, and the truth, I think, is that it was an oversight. It wasn't considered a priority because it became clear that this was going to be a short-term plan, or what people thought would be a very short-term plan, and therefore there was no need to have an amending power. The whole thing would be changed anyway within 3 years or after 3 years. So I think it was an oversight. There certainly wasn't a plan, sort of a conscious decision to sort of let's remove that power. It just was another thing that came out of the extraordinary times in which that plan was put together. But actually, it is a very good plan, and it was put together, as I say, with the same thoroughness and rigour and consultation and public inquiries and feedback and so on as any other island plan. I do want to address Deputy Moore's comment. Of course, Deputy Moore is fully entitled to argue for the policy that she has argued for consistently in regard to properties in the countryside. But I have to say I disagree with her. I do not think there was an attempt to undermine her proposition, her amendment rather, to the island plan. I looked into that as well when I was Minister. And when I looked into it, I came to the view that the amendment she proposed to the island plan was worded in a way that did not achieve what she intended. And the clarifications that were issued around that were simply to respond to that. She disagrees with that, I know, But that was the view that I formed when I was asked to look into it at the time when I was in government, and I thought I should clarify that for members. So my final point is this. I do think there should be a high bar to amending an island plan. The point about an island plan is it is a long-term planning document. The whole island benefits from stability in its planning framework. It benefits from developers and objectors or other parties to the planning system having some stable ground on which they can base their arguments. If it is available to be amended and changed at every time we sit down in this assembly, for example, that is not a stable basis, and it also encourages perverse outcomes. People might decide not to develop according to the island plan because they think, oh, if I can just hold on long enough, I'll find a friendly backbencher and maybe a fair wind in the sails, and I'll be able to get a change to do something differently. And I think the island benefits from a position where that isn't available as an easy option, where developers accept and objectors and National Trust or any other party dealing with the planning system accept and know that this is a framework that has been rigorously worked out, and it is basically one we stand by. However, of course, the Minister has outlined circumstances in which that might not be, there might need to be changes. The world does change significantly, and there needs to be a mechanism. But I am cautious because, as Deputy Alex Curtis says, we might be moving to a position whereby it does become slightly easier. That will have to go through another step. It would be a potential outcome of the regulations that a future minister might bring. But I'm certainly cautious about that because I do believe that an island planning framework, which will never please anyone, everyone rather, it will never please everyone, but the acceptance of the fact that it has been produced through a rigorous process, transparent process, which everyone has seen, gives it a credibility that however much people may grumble about it, you can point to why it is as it is. And if we make it too easy to change, then that clarity is lost. It got changed because on that day, people felt that that was a good idea. And there's been plenty of situations where that, you might be able to point to where those decisions might be repented at leisure. So I accept this, I welcome it. I think it's a good pragmatic response to the fact that the Bridging Island Plan is lasting a lot longer than it was originally intended. And it will be to a future minister to decide the practical applications of how this happens. But I did want to state those words of caution. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? Chief Minister.
Thank you. So I warmly welcome this. One of the first discussions Deputy Luce and I had back in the early days of this current government was that we agreed we needed to do something that would make us a little bit more agile. I mean, the purpose of this amendment is, as members will have realised, it reinstates a minister's power to make interim revisions to the island plan without requiring a full review. It restores a provision removed during COVID-19 in response to the pandemic in 2020. One aims to make Jersey's planning framework more flexible, more responsive, more adaptive. Members will also know one of the big challenges we have in our jobs is with planning in one way or another. And that's not taking anything away from the work of the Minister and his team and the Planning Committee, but it's a constant area that we are approached about, and it's also extremely important when we're dealing with some of our, what I would call structural problems, such as housing. Quite often, whilst we are trying to make progress in one area, we are often hamstrung by long-term plans that are untouchable without a full review. I mean, it's important, this change is needed because island plans must remain, in my opinion, aligned with changing economic conditions, external shocks, and emerging priorities. Well, I don't think in any time in modern times we've seen more of those in such a short period of time. we know now that shocks and challenges and geopolitical instability reaches our shores relatively quickly and reflects itself in a number of ways. And I felt our hands have been tied with the interim island plan because it's not enabled us to be reactive to such circumstances. You know, and a rigid system in a fast-moving world quickly becomes outdated. I won't go on, so I thank the Minister and his team for bringing this. The only regret is I think he shares that we didn't get this done sooner than now, but you know, we're getting it in. And for those reasons, I urge members to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. The Minister for Sustainable Economic Development.
Thank you, sir. And I'm very pleased to follow the Chief Minister in agreeing with his support for Deputy Luce's proposition, or the Minister for the Planning and the Environment's proposition. So it's the Island Plan, as I learned in 2022, is the ultimate document decided by committee, and therefore it is guaranteed really to have problems embedded in it, which aren't foreseen at the point of creation. And indeed, the Chief Minister quite rightly pointed to the volatile and ever-changing, fast-changing world that we live in. And so to have an island plan that cannot be reviewed in any way does the island a massive disservice, because it leaves us with a document that does, as the Chief Minister said, very quickly become outdated. And I know from my experience in 2022 and since then, as Minister for Sustainable Economic Development, I know that one of the big gaps in the island plan from 2022 was the economy. It didn't really feature. It wasn't really thought about. It has left us with many problems with regard to economic development and growth, because we didn't allocate the space for growth to take place. And I have heard over the last 4 years countless stories of businesses unable to find premises, particularly those that are kind of manual businesses, those which would ordinarily live kind of on a light industrial estate, that sort of place. We've left ourselves with no room for that to grow. So I think that what the Minister is bringing forward is a proposal which does meet the democratic safeguards that the Chair of the Scrutiny Panel quite rightly pointed to, and I know Deputy Renouf and Deputy Curtis quite rightly require and want to be in such an amendment. And it's right that there is democratic scrutiny of that, but to tie our hands was a huge mistake. 10 years is far too long a period to put a plan in place, although I accept, as Deputy Scott pointed out, the Bridging Island plan was not meant to last 10 years, but it certainly looks like it's going to go the full distance in that respect. And so 10 years for any ordinary plan is far too long, and the economy changes far too quickly. People's needs change far too quickly for us to ever kind of lay a document down before the states and say, that's it, it's locked and we'll throw away the key and we'll only pick it up again in 10 years' time. So this is an absolutely appropriate way to continue the works that I'm pleased that the Ministers for the Environments Department and my department have been working on for the last few years, of trying to ensure that the whole planning process is more aligned with the needs of the island and particularly the needs of the economy. And that's something which we have seen progress made in the last couple of years. I'm really pleased to have worked with the Minister for the Environment on that. And this proposal before us really does take that to a place where I think we now have a planning system which should benefit the island and enable us to prepare the island in the way that we need it to be. We need the island to be resilient. We need the island to be able to grow, and we need the island to be able to meet the needs of its population, and that means both residential needs as well as economic needs. And unfortunately, the island plan, I think it would be the case for any island plan, is never going to come out of this assembly after an island plan debate so unbelievably perfect that it meets all those needs. And so to give the Minister and ultimately this assembly the ability to make those revisions is absolutely the most common sense way forward. And so I ask the Assembly to wholeheartedly support the Minister's proposals because they are definitely the right thing to do in this situation. So.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? Deputy Eye.
Thank you, sir. The Privileges and Procedures Committee has noted the impact that the adoption of the amendment law would have upon the procedures of the States Assembly. The stated purpose of the amendment law is to allow the Minister for the Environment to prepare an interim revision of the Island Plan during its plan period and to prepare an interim revision of the Bridging Island Plan. To facilitate this, the amendment law would enable the Assembly to make regulations setting out the procedures that must be allowed when a new island plan, including amendments to it or an interim revision, is lodged. That would include the lodging process and minimum lodging period. PPC has no concerns regarding the impact of the amendment law on the Assembly's procedures or operation, and indeed has concluded from a procedural perspective it represents a welcome development from what is currently on the statute book. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy Eye. Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? If no other member wishes to speak, then I close the debate and I call on the Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, sir, and I thank members for their really good engagement with this debate. I might start with the Chairman of PPC and note that he didn't comment about the length of the last Bridging Island Plan debate, which might be something he would have wanted to refer to, but Island Plan debates generally do tend to go on almost as long as this particular state sitting will. I will leave it there for there. My fellow Minister, Deputy Morell, sir, I want to say that he and I work very closely together on a whole range of items, and certainly when it comes to linking the value of the economy to planning applications, I've done what I can within my ability within the law. Certainly I've maintained close links with him throughout. We've set up the Industry Partnership Board, and like I say, without the ability to change an individual policy within this plan, which is something we will be able to do soon, I've certainly issued as much guidance as I possibly could to help the economic case for applications come forward. There's more to do there, and certainly the next Island Plan debate may well reflect that. I'd like to thank the Chief Minister, sir. He was the one who charged me with the job of reforming the planning service, and we've come a long way since then. He's quite right. We need to be able to respond to shocks and challenges, and that's what I hope this legislation we pass today will allow us to do. I thank my predecessor, Deputy Renner, for his explanations about the Bridging Island Plan, and of course he's absolutely right. It was a short-term plan envisaged for just a few number of years, and in response to Deputy Scott, yes, I think the intention at the time was we wouldn't want to change a plan because it was only there for 4 years. There's no reason to bring forward changes to it. People need certainty, so the ability to change it was removed. Quite why, I don't know. But what I would say to members is, while I completely agree with all that have spoken about the need for stability and the need to remove uncertainty so everybody within the development industry and others, applicants, know what's coming. It is, and I go back to the Chief Minister talking about shocks and challenges, that this new plan will have to find a way to be flexible and agile. And the same answer goes to all those that have contributed. The rules on how we're going to do that come back to this Assembly. Deputy Curtis, absolutely spot on. This is enabling legislation, enabling us to do further work, and it is not my intention to allow, if I would have anything to do with it, the ability for any states member to just to review or to bring forward. It's the intention for the Minister to do that, but at the same time, it's going to be vital that there is clear rules around what the Minister has the ability to do and more in what the Minister does not have the ability to do. But what I stress to members is the proposals today are going to allow for those procedures, those processes to come back to this Assembly to decide what the Minister will have to do before he makes changes, what states members will have to do, will they make changes, how the next Island Plan will be proposed, how it will be debated, how it will move through all those processes. Very quickly, sir, Deputy Scott mentioned, well, we've spoken about how the Bridging Island plan found itself being where it is. Deputy Moore, I thank Deputy Renner for his explanation about footnote 30, and there was obviously some differences of opinion about what that last Bridging Island plan debate concluded with, but certainly we will have another island plan debate in the relatively short-term future, and there's an opportunity there to be much more clear and unambiguous about what was intended with the proposition that came from Deputy Moore. Finally, sir, I'd just like to thank my scrutiny chair and my scrutiny panel. As members will note, both myself and they and her have had a number of propositions to deal with. We've still got some more to come, but my panel have been hugely diligent and hard-working in reviewing everything that I've been bringing forward, not only in this state sitting, but in the previous one. So I thank them for their contribution. As ever, they've been incredibly hard-working on this particular proposition. The island plan, as they say, is a significant document, one of the most significant documents. It's hugely important. And oversight and transparency and the input of scrutiny into how it's developed is going to be invaluable in the future. The chair mentioned the need for flexibility to respond, the need for economic resilience, and the need for safeguards. And I hope members will see that what we're doing today will allow all those processes to come back to this Assembly, where safeguards will be put in place, where scrutiny will be mandatory, where the economic resilience, the flexibility to respond will all be dealt with. So at the end of this first reading on the principles, I ask for member support and the appel, please, sir.
I ask for the appel. So I ask members to return to their seats. If all members have had the opportunity of returning to their seats, then I ask the greffier to open the voting. If all members have now had the chance to cast their votes, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The principles have been adopted unanimously, 46 votes pour, no votes contre, and no abstentions. Deputy Jeune, does the Environment Scrutiny Panel wish to scrutinise this matter?
No, sir.
And we'll move on to the debate in second reading. How do you wish to propose the articles in second reading?
En bloc, please, sir. I think it's fairly straightforward. Members have understood what we're doing.
Are the articles seconded? Yes. Does any member wish to speak on the articles? Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. And I do wish to congratulate the Minister for taking this initiative. I feel that I need to just correct Deputy Renner about what I said in the last debate, because I didn't say that the Bridging Island plan hadn't gone through a full process. And indeed, both Deputy Moore and I attended the examination in public, which was unsatisfactory for a number of reasons, but that's a different story. But this is about process that, in fact, even during the course of the island plan, a policy was dropped that protected development in St Brellard's Bay, and when that was raised with the Minister, he hadn't been aware of it. We also tried to bring in amendments about providing accommodation for hospitality businesses. There had been no real kind of structure around that. And it has affected, because we had exactly this in our own constituency.
Deputy Scott,
yeah.
In terms of the articles, are you speaking to any specific articles?
I'm speaking, well, I just wanted to say that the Minister didn't respond to one question that I had asked, and that's in relation to why we seem to be missing an article allowing an amendment of the law, just, you know, generally, because more changes are anticipated.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the articles? If no other member wishes to speak on the articles, then I close the debate and I call on the Minister to reply.
So I don't really have much to say to Deputy Scott other than to repeat what Deputy Curtis said. This is enabling legislation, and if Deputy Scott has an issue with the way things were done in the past, there will be an opportunity in the next Assembly when it comes to deciding how the process for the Island Plan debate will happen, to change things which haven't worked properly or perceived to not work properly previously. So I hope very much that Deputy Scott will engage with that process. In sitting down, sir, could I call for the appel on the second reading?
Call for the appel. I ask members to return to their seats. If all members have had the chance of returning to their seats, I ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. And I can announce that the articles have been adopted. 42 votes pour, no votes contre, and 1 abstention.
Deputy War abstained.
Do you wish to propose the matter in third reading, Minister?
I do, sir.
Is the matter seconded? Does any member wish to speak in third reading? Minister.
So I just want to thank members for their support. This is quite a small change, but not an insignificant change. It means that coming back to the Assembly in the new term will be the rules around how we change the island plan, and specifically how we bring short-term changes during the period of the island plan, which will allow us to respond to anything important that needs a change. So I thank members for their support and call for the appel in the third reading.
The appel's called for. Well, I thought the Minister was replying. All right, well, does any member wish to speak in third reading? Well, I will treat the Minister's speech as a reply, unless you wish to say anything further, Minister.
I don't think so, sir.
No. Very well. You call for the appel?
I do, sir.
The appel's called for. I ask members to return to their seats. If all members have now returned to their seats, I ask the greffier to open the voting. If members have had the opportunity of casting their votes, I ask the greffier to close the voting. And I can announce that the law has been adopted in third reading unanimously, 45 votes pour, no votes contre, and no abstentions. Well, we move on to the draft Public Finances Law States Fund Jersey Amendment Regulations, which have been lodged by the Minister for Treasury and Resources. The main respondent is the chair of the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel, and I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft Public Finances Law States Funds Jersey Amendment Regulations 2000. The states make these regulations under Article 55 of the Public Finances Jersey Law 2019.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I'm very pleased to bring these regulations before the Assembly today. They are necessary to put the legislation in place to deliver the Investing in Jersey vision. In particular, they create the Jersey Capital Investment Fund, which we will know colloquially as the JCIF. This fund is the foundation of that plan and will protect investment in our infrastructure from being diverted to meet short-term, day-to-day pressures and ensure that we are allocating funds to capital which are sufficient to maintain our assets in the medium and long term. If these draft regulations are approved, the consolidated fund will be replaced from the end of 2026 with two new funds: the General Revenue Fund for day-to-day spending and the Jersey Capital Investment Fund for spending on infrastructure and other assets. The General Revenue Fund will become the default current account for the states, unless the Assembly or the Treasury Minister have agreed that funding will be dedicated for capital purposes, in which case the JCIF will be used. Once funding has been allocated to capital in the JCIF, it will become deliberately difficult to use it for other non-capital purposes. That would require approval of the States Assembly. I should stress at this point that the draft regulations do not in any way weaken the Assembly's role in approving expenditure. States members will continue to be the ultimate approvers of all spending, but in future, if these draft regulations are adopted, this will be primarily through two funds, the General Revenue Fund and the JCIF, instead of one fund at present, which is a consolidated fund. As well as creating the two funds, these draft regulations also amend the articles of the Public Finances Law relating to approvals in the budget to refer to the correct fund. The powers of the Minister to transfer funds are updated, with any capital underspends being retained in the JCIF and not being available for general revenue spend. The draft regulations propose other minor changes to the law. For example, the definition of major project, which was too restrictive, would be removed. The same spending approvals that were applied to major projects would now be applied to all projects with their own head of expenditure approved in the budget. There are other housekeeping changes to tidy up the law. Whilst these draft regulations put the relevant law changes into place, the full implementation of the fund, including the first allocations of funding to it, will be part of the budget 2027 to 2030. As well as making approvals through the new funds, the capital assets currently in the consolidated fund will be transferred to the JCIF, as will borrowing relating to the new healthcare facilities and other balances relating to assets. Moving forward, income and expenditure relating to capital assets, such as disposal proceeds, rental income, and hard maintenance costs, such as roofs and windows, will be managed through the JCIF. This will ring-fence income toward the cost of life cycle maintenance and development of assets. We won't be transferring the costs of providing services using those assets or softer maintenance, such as cleaning. These will remain in the General Revenue Fund as costs of delivering services to islanders. Sir, Jersey relies on a substantial and diverse portfolio of public assets that includes our transport network, coastal defences, schools, emergency response facilities, and sports infrastructure. Collectively, these assets play a critical role in sustaining economic activity and shaping islanders' daily experience of government. Maintaining the standard of public infrastructure and buildings expected by islanders requires government to adopt a long-term strategic approach, ensuring assets continue to meet both current requirements and the island's evolving needs. The government has also recognised that some assets that have served the island successfully for years are now in need of renewal. Through the Investing in Jersey programme, the government has established a 25-year strategy for renewing and maintaining the island's infrastructure and public buildings. The JCIF is a central enabler of that vision. It provides a mechanism to protect essential capital investment from short-term fiscal pressures and, by aligning funding with a long-term investment plan, extends the government's planning horizon beyond the conventional budget cycle. The development of longer-range capital planning will encourage a more systematic approach to assessing need through robust asset management plans, helping to ensure that infrastructure and public buildings are sustained through coordinated strategic programmes and not through reactive or ad hoc tactical interventions. In doing so, it enables capital decisions to be taken with greater foresight and at the right time, allowing funding strategies to be established that can build funds progressively. This will help to ensure that major future investments can be delivered in a planned and orderly way, while allowing the impact on the taxpayer to be carefully managed as part of a long-term fiscal strategy. How to fund the JCIF will be a key decision moving forwards. It will be for future assemblies to consider how best to fund capital expenditure, but the JCIF puts in place structures to make sure that these are transparent by separating them more clearly from the cost of providing services and other day-to-day spend. The establishment of the JCIF is the first change in the shift to longer-term financial planning and decision-making. Further actions, including a move back to multi-year budgeting, will, I hope, be brought by the next government, embedding longer-term forecasting and developing a long-term financial strategy. This will require further changes to the Public Finances Law. I have already requested law drafting so that the drafts are ready for the next Council of Ministers to consider. At this stage, sir, I would like to thank the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel for the report on these draft law changes. Their report is a thorough and thoughtful piece that shows a really good grasp of the issues, and I welcome the panel's input. I also welcome the comments of PPC and can confirm that the changes to standing orders have been drafted, and I again anticipate that the next Treasury Minister will lodge these changes for debate once they're ready to bring these regulations into effect by order. If the States agrees these important changes to the Public Finances Law, the JCIF will be established in 2026. However, Budget 27 to 30 will be the first to make allocations to the fund, with capital expenditure being managed through the fund from 2027. If the regulations are approved, the next Treasury Minister will consider any further changes to the Public Finances Manual that are needed to implement suitable controls and governance in time for the 2027 budget, although these are expected to be limited. Sir, I therefore ask the Assembly to give their support, and I propose these regulations. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Minister. Are the principles seconded? Does any member wish to speak on the principles? Deputy Rob Ward.
Thank you, sir. I was just going to say the capital investment plan and the idea of long-term planning for capital projects is very important. And I think one of the reasons we haven't had some projects which were agreed some years ago completed is because there hasn't been that foresight, and we do need to plan ahead, I would say, particularly for redevelopment of St Helier. However, I do not I am not in support of a medium-term financial plan for day-to-day spending. That has shown in the past to lock us into 4 years of spending in a particular way, and has led to all sorts of inflexibility and problems across our public sector and our services, which need to be able to be responded to year on year. So, although I agree that long-term planning, the capital projects is there, the move, the sort of tacit move to an MTFP for our day-to-day funding is something that I would be unlikely to support. I just want to put that on record. So I think those two things can be separate, and I think it gives greater flexibility with our day-to-day expenses, particularly in an ever-changing world. But I think we do need to have plans for longer-term capital projects. So I will be supporting, but with that proviso. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? Deputy Miles.
Thank you, sir. I'm wondering whether I should propose the adjournment because my speech might take longer than 5 minutes.
The adjournment proposed.
I propose yes.
And the state stands adjourned until 2 p.m.